Chapter 161 The First Mystic Declaration. Thales was stunned as he looked at the invitation in his hands. His thoughts were all over the place. This cannot be. Is this genuine or fake? He blinked in disbelief to confirm if everything in front of him was real. Is this a practical joke? A few seconds passed before he put down the invitation. He took a deep breath. He tried to understand the situation. First of all, wasn't he already by Yodel? Plus, Ida is just next door. WYA and Ralph are taking turns guarding the door. There are the soldiers and troops in the diplomatic mission, the countless guards in the entire heroic spirit palace, and even those cool-looking, so-called white blade guards. How can he just... That rascal. All of a sudden, a wave of palpitations surged within Thales' chest. He stopped breathing. Thales realized that something was off. He turned his head, and his scalp felt numb. He cast his gaze on the window. And at that moment, the prince's heart skipped a beat. His long-lost friend, Asda Sakern, was standing by the window with his hands behind his back. Thales looked at him and his seemingly indifferent pupils. Just like when they met for the first time, the mystic had on a thin yet finely tailored blue robe. His posture was straight, and a confident yet mysterious smile hung on his handsome face. Graceful as always, and as composed as before. In that instance, Thales' mind blanked out. What about the agreed 15 minutes? How are you, my smart, mature, but mischievous little friend? The air mystic spoke in a gentle tone as he nodded at Thales. Thales opened his mouth and took a deep breath. From now on, any sound between us will not travel beyond a single foot from us. Asda seemed to know what he was thinking. He gradually raised his right index finger and shook it at Thales. The others will not disturb us. Upon hearing that, Thales turned into a deflating balloon. He released the air he just inhaled. He then dismissed the idea of calling for help. Asda's smile was as warm as ever, but in Thales' eyes, it caused extreme uneasiness. Wait. Thales and the mystic were not alone in the room. Thales' heart moved. Following Thales' line of vision, the mystic had a quick glance of little rascal, who was deep in slumber by the bed. Of course, your adorable little maid will not be awakened. In dreamland, little rascal's mouth moved slightly, but Thales could not hear any of her murmuring or breathing anymore. Thales lightly sighed as he turned around. He curled his lips to reveal a grimace. You're still the same, so considerate and caring. Asda nodded politely. Thales forced himself to begin thinking about all the intelligence he had on this mystic. However, the first memory that popped up was that of the chess room in the central area of Red Street Market. 3 people were literally squeezed into the shape of a ball. The second prince swallowed and forced a laugh or two. He tried to imagine something more acceptable. What about comparing him to the cute Giza? Right, Thales shrugged his shoulders, pretending like it was effortless. He waved his invitation around, and painstakingly used his most casual tone as though he could not care less. I thought you were coming in 15 minutes. You know, Asda revealed his pearly white teeth, I like to be early. Thales tried to restrain his thoughts and just swallowed the curse words that hung at the edge of his mouth. Honestly, I thought you wouldn't show up so soon. Thales adjusted his sitting position and smiled awkwardly. Everyone said you wanted to vanish for a while. Asda looked straight at him. His gaze was as calm as the waters. It evoked fear in Thales' heart. The weapon wielded by that masked friend of yours was obviously not complete, the air mystic said. Otherwise, a perfectly conditioned, fully unleashed legendary anti-mystic equipment should have been able to seal a mystic. Asda's gaze remained cool, but his next word startled Thales. Permanently. The legendary anti-mystic equipment. Conceal. A mystic. Permanently. Even so, that incomplete equipment could have kept me sealed for decades at least. Asda smirked, but I received a little help, so I was released from prison this quickly. Perhaps it was the curiosity inherited from fragments of memories from his past life, or a natural characteristic, or even the anxiousness about his own lineage, but at that moment, Thales' heart desired for knowledge on the mystic's exuberance. He suppressed his fear towards the calamity's identity, he longed to know more. Firstly, I'm going to congratulate you. Asda brought his hands up. With his clearly friendly, yet fear-evoking smile, he walked towards Thales. Thales, Your Highness, although it was apparent from your performance that you were definitely not ordinary, I must admit that this identity of yours surprised me. Thales looked at the approaching Asda. His heartbeat gradually accelerated as he could barely shrug his shoulders. I remember there being a chair for receiving guests in the room. We can sit down and... No need for that, Asda shook his head and said nonchalantly. The next moment, Thales felt his skin crawl as he watched Asda walk up to him, bend his knees, and just sat on thin air. Asda smiled brilliantly as he sat on his transparent chair. I brought my own chair. As the prince watched this peculiar scene, he controlled his facial muscles resolutely, not allowing them to twitch too much. Let's talk about your future, Your Highness. Asda anticipated Thales' reaction. Thales knew in his heart that although he used the title, Your Highness, this man before him had no regard for his special identity. It incited a strange feeling in Thales, who after becoming prince had tasted all sorts of judgmental looks. Thales took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down before he could recognize the situation and protect himself, even if the one before him was a calamity who could not be survived through conventional means. Of course, he recalled his conversation with Ramon. He muttered to himself, all this while, I've thought of every possible method to investigate some things about, mystics and magic. In this disproportional conversation, he had to first grab hold of authority in initiating topics. Very good, this will save us a lot of time. Sure enough, Asda's eyes lit up. What did you find out? Not much, but not little either. Thales carefully selected his words. For instance, I found out what exactly is magic, and that there are 3 great magic towers. I also met a person who quite the avid researcher of magic. Asda revealed a look of interest. After Thales cautiously narrated a summary of Raymond's words, Asda could not help but lament, it has been thousands of years since the collapse of the magic tower. Even after that in the 6th century ban on magic, there is still someone who believes in magic. This has really exceeded my expectations. Thales observed the look on Asda's face, and desperately pondered over his escape plans at the same time. The other party is a mystic, non-peaceful methods are out of the question. Delaying time is worth considering. If only I can delay enough until assistance arrives, but will assistance even make a difference? The other party was probably hoping that he would become one of them, the damned, cursed mystics. His best bet would be to deal with the situation on a level ground, and achieve results by concession and humility. So, magic exists just as he described it, a kind of sense, a kind of belief. At this thought, Thales felt his curiosity grow regarding this question. He cautiously asked, what do you suppose? But the air mystic did not immediately answer. Asda's low gaze remained motionless. Under Thales' curious gaze, he crossed his arms again and remained silent for a long time. No. Magic is not as such, not only as such and not necessarily as such. Finally, Asda slowly shook his head, but he slowly said, everyone has their own understanding of magic. At the same time, everyone believes in their own understanding. Thales was startled upon hearing what was said. Asda raised his left hand to look at his palm. His expression appeared complex. In that instant, Thales found the Asda before him looking more like an ordinary citizen than ever. Not a terrifying calamity. Magic is a choice. Asda stared intently at his palm as he slowly clenched his fist. The choices are not individual or mutually exclusive, and they do not have relative superiority. It aligns with the fundamental philosophies of the convention of all magic, in Soul Tower. Thales had a sudden thought. Wait. He heard a unique word. It's also one of the magical philosophies I agree with and acknowledge, Asda plainly said. Thales raised his hand subconsciously, a habit caused by memory fragments from his past life. He realized quickly that this was not his past life, and it was only the both of them. As he started to take his hand back in embarrassment, Asda very habitually and naturally reached his palm out, catching Thales by surprise. He tilted it towards Thales and nodded. Permission to ask. It felt like a practice done hundreds of thousands of times before. Asda came to his senses and smiled. Very good, it seems like there won't be a need for me to teach you the classroom etiquettes and habits of a wizard's apprentice anymore. Thales let go of his hand and hastily asked, Soul Tower. I know about it, but, what kind of magic tower is it? What about its origins? Thales did not even realize that he completely forgot about the fact that the Asda in front of him was an extremely dangerous, non-human being. He even forgot about his original intentions. In that moment, his thirst for all the knowledge yet to be learned completely outweighed his rationale. Soul Tower, Asda squinted and smiled mysteriously as if he knew that Thales would ask about it. What do you know about it? The Soul Tower. Thales lowered his head, desperately trying to recall Raymond's words. I remember it having a special symbol, and that the tower causes differing opinions as well as indecisiveness in common people. Also, it seems like it doesn't get along with the other 2 magic towers. Asda did not comment, he only allowed his gaze to linger on Thales for the longest time. In response to the other party's appraising gaze, Thales put on a dull smile. Very good, an exuberant sense of curiosity and the will to investigate, qualities worth encouraging indeed, the air mystic slowly said. Thales could only smile in return. Also, here's some prior knowledge you should already know. Asda was expressionless, but his eyes glimmered. Listen well. Thales subconsciously sat upright. This time, the mystic did not keep him in a state of suspense, instead he promptly replied, Year 618, Chronicles of the Kings. After the conclusion of the battle of survival between humans and the 3 clans, Wizard Yeri Crescent, a propagator, who returned from the battle left Ascetic Tower with 5 students in tow. It was due to a disagreement in philosophies. Along the way, they made their philosophy public, imparted their ways and gathered a lot of wizards who were exiled by the war. Their group increased in number, and their philosophies as well as methods grew increasingly distinct. Here, Asda paused and squinted to see Thales' expression. Thales frowned. Then, don't stop halfway. Asda stared at him with a deep, meaningful gaze, after which he smiled and continued. Finally, Wizard Yiri, we eventually honored him as a master, and 21 other sages arrived at Foothill Peninsula, by the peninsular beach. They built twin towers to reside there permanently and study magic. Asda paused again for a few more seconds. His gaze pierced through Thales as he seemingly peered into his past. However, Thales had no time to attend to the other party's looks. He was already obsessed with listening. Averting his perplexed gaze, Asda shook his head and continued, the newborn magic tower attracted many wizards to visit. The atmosphere of novelty, freedom, and equality in magical study gathered immense popularity. That piece of land, with the twin towers as its center, quickly became the wizards' gathering. Unlike the ascetic's bitterness and vigilance, or the alchemist's zealotry and destruction, this residence slowly became the frontier of theoretical study in the magical world. After the proposal of all kinds of unseen, unprecedented magical theories and hypotheses, progressive improvements were made in endless debates as well as arguments. Magic branches initially unrecognized by the two great magic towers were established in succession, forming the Soul Tower magical system that we are exposed to today. Just like that, the sages collectively built the third branch beyond Ascetic Tower and Alchemy Tower. It was also the youngest, most special, enthusiastic, prosperous, influential wizard propagator in the world. Having said that, Asda bowed his head and heaved a sigh that only he understood. After the death of Yiri Crescent, his ash box was suspended midair in the middle of the twin towers. The surface of the box had the following words engraved in iron, "May every wizard have an independent and free soul." That was how Soul Tower got its name. Asda gently closed his mouth. Thales composed himself and let out a long breath. The Chronicles of the Kings. The Battle of Survival. Propagator, Wizard Yiri. The youngest wizard propagator. The origins of Soul Tower. These were all taboo knowledge, which he could not have easily retrieved from the books. Thales' heartbeat accelerated. It was as if an unprecedented world just opened up to him. If only Ramon were here, would he kneel and weep in agitation? Thales thought. He continued, raising his hand urgently. What about the Convention of All Magic? What is it? The Convention of All Magic. It seemed as though Asda had missed the expression on Thales' face. He continued steadily, his crisp, pleasing voice echoing in the small space as he narrated the world's most tabooed, lost knowledge. This is an important branch of study in Soul Tower. It originated during the Empire's first civil unrest. Officially established in the year 373 of the Empire calendar, it flourished from the 5th to 7th century. At its peak, at least half of the wizards in Soul Tower came from the Convention of All Magic. Every time a convention was held, even apprentices and wizards from Alchemy Tower and Ascetic Tower would come to listen and comment, tit for tat. Asda paused. He nodded satisfyingly as he looked at Thales' face, which was full of curiosity and desire for knowledge. Thales' heart skipped a beat. He just realized that the initiator of the conversation fell back to Asda once again. But he really wanted to know. The second prince looked at Asda as a sense of contradiction arose in his heart. The mystic continued with a smile on his face. I cannot conclude using simple words. Summarizing the characteristics of this branch of study is an irresponsibility towards the student, but I can give you a book list encompassing a dozen of the most impactful books. Actually, no, precisely speaking, it should be 23 important writings, that is if you want to achieve a more in-depth understanding of the Convention of All Magic. Thales' heart raced once he finished listening to the mystic's little speech. An inexplicable sense of agitation filled his brain. But he calmed down quickly and realized that there was a problem. Mr. Asda, before becoming a calamity, you were a wizard, weren't you? Thales looked at Asda in wonder. He did not even think about whether his words violated the other party's taboos. Wizard. That's a title awarded to a person who has achieved recognized achievements in a certain magic territory, at least, that was how it went in Soul Tower. Asda crossed his arms, lightly curled his lips and faintly shook his head. I was just a little apprentice back then. Thales' heart moved. Ah, so sure enough, you used to be. Asda nodded, a peculiar flow of colors appeared in his eyes. Yes, an apprentice of Soul Tower. Thales scowled. But, didn't you just say that, it's been thousands of years since the collapse of Magic Tower? Thousands of years since its collapse. So, I know what you want to ask. Asda looked at him and smiled. 1,190 years old, that is my age this year. Thales was shocked. 1,190. That means. This man. In a daze, Thales looked at Asda Sakern, young, handsome, and completely unchanged since the day they first met. It was unbelievable. He was over 500 years older than Tormund Jadastar, the king of Renaissance, and the hero, Rikaru Extit from 600 years ago. Thales' mouth hung wide open. There's no need to be surprised. Every mystic is immortal and indestructible. Asda could not care less as he looked at Thales' expression. This is a very normal age. The oldest mystic has already been around for more than 1,300 years. Thales wanted to search for a notebook, until Asda stopped him with his arms. There's no hurry. Asda looked up and gazed at him with radiant eyes. We have a lot more time to spend with each other. Furthermore, I have enough patience. I will teach you from the very beginning, from the basics, from magic to the magic tower, mystic energy and everything about mystics. From philosophy to energy, all the secrets of the magical world since its inception will be revealed to you. Asda's tone was very enticing. After that, you will be awarded the prestigious secrets and energy of the mystics. Until you really become a mystic. In that instance, it felt as if Thales was pulled back to reality from an illusional world. Become a mystic. Thales swallowed earnestly. He recalled Gilbert's attitude towards calamities and also the drama in the Battle of Eradication at Dark Knight Temple. Then, there was the insane, unreasonable blood mystic. The cursed mystics. The sight of Giza's disgusting tree roots and tentacles floated before his eyes. He could not help but feel apprehensive and resistant. Yet, a voice whispered in Thales' heart, "But, I'm so curious. I want to know more, learn more, understand more." Thales realized that the knowledge narrated by Asda earlier had captivated his thirst and desire for knowledge. Furthermore, he obviously had an abnormal body, he had to gain more understanding about his situation. Thales frowned bitterly and probed further, "About that, I'm saying if we can take it slow. On the matter of becoming a mystic, how about we discuss it again?" The air mystic did not speak. However, the prince could obviously feel the surrounding atmosphere intensify. Thales tried to control the frequency of his breathing. He waited nervously for a reply. Asda concealed his smile and looked at Thales sternly. In a serious manner, he whispered, "Thales, becoming a mystic is your fate. You cannot avoid it. There is no second choice." Thales gasped a little. "This looks to be quite bad. About that, how about you tell me first?" Nervousness and pressure started to return to Thales' heart. He painstakingly smiled and cautiously asked, "Mystics, what are you, we exactly?" This time, Asda locked his expressionless gaze on him for a long, long time. Under the mystic's emotionless and pressing eyes, embarrassment as well as helplessness crept across Thales' face. That was until Asda steadily said, "I can't tell you the answer to this question, because you haven't become a mystic." Asda's eyes remained fixed on him, but his tone and words became cold and mysterious. It was as if they had traveled back to that night in Red Street Market. "Only when you become a mystic, will you understand, only then, you will finally know what a mystic really is." Thales frowned a little. He doesn't want to tell me. But before that, don't you still have to tell me some of the fundamentals? Thales scratched his head. He pondered about his escape plan while he said, "At least, tell me about your understanding, what is a mystic to you?" However, before his voice fell, Asda's expression changed. He suddenly spoke, interrupting him with an unprecedented grimness. "Not possible," Asda said heavily. His expression turned cold as he solemnly added, "Absolutely not possible. You are not allowed to ask this question again." Just like that, it seemed like the worst thing to encounter. Thales was shocked by the sudden tension coming from Asda. Did he ask the wrong question? Thales observed Asda cautiously until he was sure that his skin would not be torn off the next time he spoke. Then, he carefully asked, "Why?" Asda squinted, but his expression remained solemn. "Because, it is one of the three great declarations," the mystic whispered. Thales was absolutely dazed. Three great, what? Remember this, what I am about to tell you next is top secret. Only mystics know about it. Asda knew about Thales' doubts and he knitted his brows. His eyes were frosted and he had an unprecedented heaviness and solemn tone. Below Thales' nervous gaze, he said, "Exposing them equals betraying all the mystics in the world. Believe me, you will not like that ending." As his words came to an end, Asda's eyes cast an icy look on Thales. Thales shivered. A secret, only the mystics themselves know. At that moment, it seemed as though the surrounding air had frozen. Thales simply felt his heartbeat accelerating endlessly. He could only squeeze out a smile after some exertion, and he finally nodded with difficulty. After seeing Thales' response, Asda slowly nodded. There are 3 rules that must be obeyed by a mystic. These rules are called the 3 Great Declarations. Thales frowned slightly. The first of the 3 mystic declarations is to not investigate one another. The youth in the blue shirt had a stern expression on his face, and his gaze was as sharp as ever. Chapter 162 Letting Go of a Suspicion. The first declaration is to not investigate one another. Thales revealed a puzzled and suspicious look. Mystic energy is the foundation of our existence. It is also the reason why we are called mystics. Never ever ask another mystic about his understanding of mystic energy. Also, never expose your own understanding to any mystic. Asda looked cold as he used 3 continuous s to emphasize his current stance. This is what it means, to not investigate one another. Mystic energy, understanding of mystic energy. Thales raised his eyebrows upon hearing those words. So, that is a mystic's weakness. Once your foundation and fundamentals are discovered, you will be attacked by another mystic. However, Asda only kept his icy stare steadily locked on Thales. It lasted a good few seconds. What's wrong? Under his cold stare, a sense of fear rose in Thales' heart. Whether the understanding of mystic energy is a weakness, foundation or fundamental thing doesn't matter, what you're doing now is exactly an attempt to discover my understanding of the mystic energy. Asda finally muttered. His words caused his listener to turn pale with fright. Among mystics, this will be regarded as a declaration of war. Thales jumped in surprise and retreated without realizing. This is regarded as a declaration of war. Thales immediately recalled the words the blood mystic had mentioned before, mystic civil war. All right, I will ask no more. The second prince nervously shrugged. So, mystics cannot discuss mystic energy among themselves. Your daily interaction involves only greetings of hello, goodbye, and have you eaten, no contact or dealings after parting ways. This is not a joke. Asda interrupted him coldly. The three great declarations of the mystics were summed up through countless experiences and examples by our predecessors. It doesn't matter which one is violated, there will be bad, grave, and unpredictably terrible consequences. The air mystic's eyes flashed as a chill ran down Thales' back. Thales was stunned. He could not help but blankly say, there will be, what consequences? You will find out. Asda shook his head. Now, you just have to remember the first declaration and that it should never be violated. Thales sighed. What about the other two great declarations? You're still far from being able to comprehend their level. Asda still shook his head mysteriously. When you become a mystic and find your own name of origin, I will tell you, don't ask me what a name of origin is, you will find out later as well. Thales, who was prepared to speak, could only hang his head in disappointment when he heard those words. All right, then at least, help me by rectifying a suspicion. Asda nodded lightly. His face seemed to have relaxed a little. Whenever I utilize it, what you call the mystic energy, the effects are different in every instance. But I feel intense pain almost every time once I'm finished. Not to mention, recent encounters almost took my life. Thales revealed a worried expression. As Thales spoke, some worrying scenes floated in his mind. In the dungeons at Vine Manor, the stocks and chains on Ralph's body. In front of Renaissance Palace, that young psionic assassin and his warm, beating, heart. In Black Sand region, before the mystic gun, red rays scattered in all directions and Araka's motionless bow. Thales silently clenched his fist. What's going on? He suddenly noticed Asda frowning upon hearing his words. The mystic had always looked indifferent, so that highlighted the unusual changes in his expression. Utilize. A while later, Asda squinted and shook his head as he snorted. It seemed like he did not believe Thales' words. You haven't even touched the door to being a mystic, how could you have utilized mystic energy? Thales was stunned. Do you remember that time in Red Street Market? You squeezed me. The second prince rubbed his hands in embarrassment as he observed Asda's facial expression. He decided not to describe the night's events in detail. In short, we blew a house up and you discovered that I had a mystic's physique or something. It was the feeling at that moment. I later discovered that as long as I was bleeding, I could utilize that power. It was the same kind of feeling. Asda's expression changed again. The room went quiet for a few seconds. Asda stared at the ground, seemingly deep in thought. After a while, the air mystic raised his head and solemnly said, No, your performance that night, we usually refer to it as losing control. Asda pursed his lips. Right, losing control. Thales clapped his hands in realization. I remember now, you said those words that night. Losing control. The next moment, Thales' face was bleach white and he did not continue. He suddenly understood what the mystic meant. Losing control. Losing control. Thales was in shock. He murmured, losing control. Asda watched him silently, the expression in his eyes unclear. You mean, this power, this so-called mystic energy, can't be controlled? Thales frowned as his breathing quickened. I can't actively utilize it. Asda squinted, apparently surprised at how fast Thales handled the situation and reacted. You can't, at least not at your current level. Asda shook his head and confirmed Thales' conjecture. Thales looked at Asda with doubt. Impossible, I can utilize it every time I bleed. Thales gritted his teeth and felt his head. The feeling's just like waking up from a chaotic dream. At this moment, the mystic's face changed. He suddenly raised his index finger. At the next second, Thales' voice broke as he felt the surrounding air stagnate. Then, he could not inhale anymore. In shock, Thales stared at Asda, who had his finger raised. But the mystic just looked at the prince coldly, without a word. How? Thales held his neck, and opened his mouth with much effort, yet he still could not get any air. It was as if all the gas particles around him had frozen. Do you want to suffocate me? Thales opened his mouth in vain as he could not make a sound. All he could do was to display a furious expression, until the lack of oxygen flushed his face bright red. Just as Thales was ready to reach for his dagger, Asda finally put his finger down. Air started to flow again. Hoot! Thales finally took a breath of air. Paralyzed on the chair, he gasped and swallowed big mouths of air. Why, Thales, who just recovered his access to air, looked at Asda with fury and dissatisfaction. Have you already forgotten so quickly? The mystic leaned forward and looked into his eyes. His face remained the same, but his voice was unfriendly. What did I tell just you? What did you tell me? We just met for... Thales was stunned at first, but he came to his sense. We just... Alright, fine, Thales murmured as he remembered Asda's words. The first mystic declaration. His face fell and he sighed. To not investigate one another. Damn it. Asda watched him intently and gradually nodded. Don't forget again. Also, don't tell me how your mystic power feels like again. The mystic gave Thales a meaningful look as he sat back in his seat. Having experienced that, Thales was still in a bad mood as he continued to straighten out his breath. At the same time, his previously lowered vigilance was raised to the highest once more. Abominable. This fella definitely can't be treated like an ordinary human being. As Thales silently cursed, Asda slowly lowered his head. His expression was unclear. A strange silence fell between them. After a long pause, Asda finally said, apart from your feelings and understanding of the state, tell me the background as well as conditions when you actively lost control. Thales sighed. He compliantly explained it all, from Vine Manor to Broken Dragon Fortress. A few minutes later. Apart from Red Street Market, the rest do not seem like having lost control. Already utilizing mystic energy at the subconscious, contactor, phase. That's extremely unusual, Asda muttered. This is my first encounter, or I should say, there has never been such an occurrence in the history of mystics. And, it accompanies the body's increasing damage and burden. Asda's eyes glimmered as though he was in deep thought. In that instance, Thales could swear that he saw a glimpse of blue light graze past the mystic's eyes. Thales slowed his breathing. He could not help but feel nervous. The feeling was just like waiting for the doctor to read out a diagnosis. Finally, Asda raised his head and plainly said, nonetheless, every mystic is one of a kind. Maybe, you're one of the more unique ones, we don't know yet. But, before we start progressing incrementally, you will not utilize mystic energy anymore. I don't want you to turn into a corpse before you become a mystic. One of the more unique ones. Why am I more unique? Thales heaved a sigh in his heart. Upon saying that, a thought appeared in Thales' mind. He remembered a key incident. Right, Mr. Asda. Thales hesitated. May I know? Asda narrowed his eyes and waited for his question. If you have lived this long, you must know your kind, peers. Thales paused for a while and finally gritted his teeth. May I know if you know this other mystic? Her name is... He took a deep breath. Theron Garana. Asda's face remained unchanged. Thales raised his head and looked straight into Asda's glimmering eyes. She could be my mother. And also the reason for me being unique. Asda leaned back into emptiness. A few seconds of silence proceeded again. In the midst of the silence, Thales could hear his heart beating. But instead of urging him, he awaited Asda's reply as he looked at him nervously. This may be a great opportunity to unravel the mystery of his physique and his origins. Thales looked at the mystic and silently thought, I can't waste it anymore. Furthermore, he had long since doubted the identity and race of his birth mother. As Thales' mind wandered, Asda's voice gradually sounded. Why do you think so? The mystic plainly said, why do you think that your mother is a mystic? Thales was startled. It is only possible that I inherited the physique of a mystic from her, is it not? Thales touched his head and nervously said, additionally, I was thinking, if my mystic physique is an inheritance, could it be that my mother is also? Worried, Thales thought about his strangely gruff, fast-recovering physique, his abnormal brain capacity, and the retrieving of memories from his past life via flashbacks. And it doesn't stop there. From King Kessel, Gilbert and Gimes, ambiguity towards his mother to King Kessel and Ritual Master Lys's suspicious conversation during the Bloodline ceremony, from the head Ritual Master's display of hatred towards his mother to Yodel's words of, to be tangled up with mystics, at Mindy's Hall. All of the above, don't they indicate that? Impossible, the clear, male voice rang. Thales looked at Asda in shock. Asda looked into his eyes. Sternly and decisively, he shook his head. Firstly, a mystic's physique cannot be inherited. It has nothing to do with your bloodline. A wizard once experimented on this. He divided 5,000 men and women into 5 groups. Forget it, you wouldn't want to know about it. Long story short, mystics are not an hereditary occurrence, Asda said with indifference in his eyes. Thales frowned. Asda closed his eyes and opened them again. Secondly, mystics are no longer ordinary beings. Once we completely become a mystic, a tremendous change will occur in our physique. It's not the same for everyone, but the common characteristic is, it is no longer possible for us to have interracial offspring. Thales' mouth hung open in surprise. Thirdly, apart from you, the world's mystics, including the sealed ones, come to a total of 14 people. I've met every single one of them, none with that name. Asda's face was solemn, his tone definite. Thales looked at him in a daze. 14 mystics. So few. And among these 14, none of them. In short, your mother cannot be a mystic. Asda definitely shook his head and his tone was as hard as iron. Upon hearing that, Thales completely paused for a good 10 seconds. He then nodded in realization. That's how it is. So, there is no mystic called Theron. Thales exhaled as an unknown tightness eased itself in his heart. It is not possible for mystics to have offspring. With his prediction deviated, he leaned against his chair with a sense of emptiness. He pondered on the mystery of his origin. A few seconds later, Thales exhaled as he revealed a self-deprecating smile. I suppose this is considered as letting go of a suspicion. A suspicion that has long gnawed at my heart. But at the same time, Asda shook his head. Asda crossed his arms and said thoughtfully, however, strictly speaking, there is a mystic with the ability to create life, although I don't think that it is truly in the sense of the word, giving birth. A chill struck Thales' heart. The second prince's pupils contracted. He slowly raised his head. Who? Asda uncrossed his arms and raised his head. A bad-tempered woman, who's also one of my partners. Asda revealed a bright smile. Then, the mystic mentioned a name. A name that changed the color on Thales' face. Giza Streelman, Asda plainly said. The Blood Mystic. Chapter 163 Monster and Monster. Your reaction isn't quite right. Leisurely massaging his long and slim fingers, Asda observed Thales' reaction. The air pressure in your body is changing rapidly. Giza Streelman, the air mystic repeated flatly. Why, does this name trigger some memories? Giza. The Blood Mystic. Thales' expression varied as recalled his unusual experience in the birch tree forest. It was a combination of anxiety, fright, terror, disgust, abnormality and mania. There was also what that unreasonable woman said before disappearing into the darkness. I definitely will not let you suffer. Pale-faced, the Prince of Constellation was jolted out from the past. Raising his head, he looked at Asda as he sighed and nodded. Not long ago, I had a relaxed and friendly conversation with your dearest Miss Giza, who is widely rumored to be one of Blood Bottle Gang's bosses, Thales said listlessly. Asda narrowed his eyes a little. Thoughts made up of mystic energy surged slowly within his body. Giza. So, she's already safe from the threat of the blazing wind cannon, no longer weak or in deep sleep. She's also regained consciousness once again. Perhaps, she has even recovered her ability to eat. Asda's thoughts fluctuated slightly. Ever since I recovered my physical body, I've traveled a long distance to search for this boy, following his peculiar breath. I never cared about affairs related to Blood Bottle Gang at all. Compared to this boy, Blood Bottle Gang is practically a worthless pawn. However, since Giza has returned, perhaps, it is time to talk to her after such a long time. After all, because of this boy's appearance, Blood Bottle Gang's plan may have to be delayed. However, what Thales said after that recaptured the mystic's attention. Seeing a fellow mystic, Madame Giza expressed uncontrollable joy. Observing Asda's expression, Thales took a deep breath and exhaled with force. She then decided to kill me. To celebrate our first meeting. Having said that, Thales noticed that Asda was furrowing his brows. It was a rare sight. The air mystic, who had been nonchalant as well as unmoving, rested his right hand on his left arm and pinched his chin. He contemplated for a moment. Thales raised his hands and gestured 2 quotation marks with his fingers. He raised his brows and mocked, quoting her original words, "This is for your own good." Asda's expression was solemn. You mean to say, Giza knew that you're a future mystic, but still tried to kill you? The air mystic cleverly got the point. Gazing into Asda's eyes, the second prince nodded slightly. She obviously did not welcome my identity as a mystic. Thales shrugged and spoke in a mocking manner, whether it was intentional or not. I reckon that competition is tough in the field of mystics to the point that she needed to beat down a newbie. Asda continued muttering to himself and Thales could feel that he was contemplating things carefully. I was fortunate that day. Thales shook his head. I can practically imagine my next meeting with her. After some time, the air mystic raised his head solemnly. This is a problem. Asda's tone became cold once again, his eyes were bright and piercing. As her partner, I will have a talk with her, just as we did in the past. Watching Asda's expression, Thales assumed that their conversation was about to end. At the very least, the enmity between them was starting to dissipate. It's time to discuss my future plans with him. Although it sounds tempting, becoming a mystic and obtaining great power, it's too risky. It would be better for me to observe for a bit. Very well. At this moment, the air mystic got up from his non-existent chair, and interrupted Thales from his thoughts without any expression. Let's go. Thales' face immediately changed. Go. Thales' gaze flickered and his breathing became rapid. Where are we going? I'm taking you away from this place, of course. The air mystic raised his hand and blew open the bedroom window, revealing the darkness outside. Cold air seeped into the room non-stop. Sleeping soundly beside the bed, Little Slick unconsciously curled up and licked her lips. She tightened the blanket around her body. Now, Thales shuddered. Clenching his fists, he stared at Asda in disbelief. Isn't this a bit sudden? Right now, there are two complete and powerful legendary anti-mystic weapons in Dragon Cloud City, Asda said slowly. They are in this palace. Thales froze and looked outside the door. The air mystic sighed. Surely you didn't think that I took such a risk to find you here, just to sit down and have a chat with you. Thales furrowed his brows and his breathing became unstoppably rapid. His worst fear had come true. Get ready to begin your new life. Asda nodded nonchalantly and said, as a mystic, your journey is just beginning, and there is still a long way to go. Scratching his head, Thales desperately thought of excuses to buy time. Wait, but I still have a lot of questions like what's the relationship between wizards and mystics, what do I do to become a mystic, and what Giza said about the faction of mystics. Oh, yes, there's the legendary anti-mystic equipment as well. Seeing through his plan, Asda shook his head heartlessly. Child, both of us know very well that stalling for time is pointless. Even if your subordinates notice something wrong and come to rescue you, it will just be their misfortune, even for that seemingly supreme class elf, whose breathing is balanced and steady, the mystic replied flatly. We've proven 1,000 years ago, that even the gods can't do anything about us. Thales froze. He glanced at the open window and felt the chilly air against his skin. *T. What do I do now? Wait, Thales raised his head. He looked worried and anxious. It's one thing to become a mystic, but letting go of everything and leaving with Asda is another matter altogether. He had to find a way to stay. The circumstances of mystics in this world are horrible, aren't they? Thales stared at the air mystic and sighed. From the destruction of the ancient empire to the battle of eradication and the separation of the peninsulas, perhaps, it is not a good idea for me to leave with you. Perhaps, I should stay here. We can regularly. Unexpectedly, Asda stared at him from above with an indecipherable gaze. Thales felt his heart clench from Asda's stare. He could not help but swallow his remaining words. Asda spoke slowly with an undulating tone. However, his words somehow sent a chill down Thales' spine. The world chose to control our numbers by forgetting about magic in the past. Therefore, most people don't know who we are, like those idiots under me in the gang. Even the battle of eradication that everyone ought to be very familiar with became a legend where humans fought against unknown calamities. The mystic put his hands behind his back. Nonetheless, those with status as well as power are still vigilant about us, and they see us as the biggest threat. Both magic and mystic energy are deeply loathed. Asda narrowed his eyes slightly. However, this is exactly why you must come with me. Thales stared at Asda, his blood froze. Asda's gaze was grim. The moment your identity comes to light, they won't care that you're a prince. You will be treated worse than those orcs who fell into human hands. A little stunned, Thales stared at Asda. Pursing his lips, he recalled the play about the Battle of Eradication, which was staged in Dark Knight Temple, what Gilbert said about calamities, the disconcerting Black Prophet, Ramon who kept himself out of the public sight, and Yodel's mask. But, more than 10 seconds later. No, I can't just leave like this. Gritting his teeth, Thales shook his head. I am their prince. I have responsibilities, and I know a lot of people. Some things cannot be abandoned that easily. There is conflict between Exted and Constellation. If I go missing, war will. However, he was cut off by the mystic again. Asda flashed a little smile, but his gaze was a mocking one. Are you refusing to become a mystic because you're worried about your safety? Or, are you reluctant to leave your esteemed life as the Prince of Constellation? Hearing that, Thales froze a little. The air mystic snorted coldly and said, even though 2 months ago, you were only a lowly child beggar. At this point, Thales was truly shaken. Reluctant to leave. Prince of Constellation. Esteemed life. He recalled the night he first arrived in Mindy's hall, when that robust figure announced that he was the only remaining heir to Constellation's throne. How Gilbert and Yodel kneeled on one knee before him. Pledging his life with his hand on his chest. Ralph clumsily signaling, as you wish. Last but not least, the surging crowd below the Hall of Stars along with their deafening cheers. Thales subconsciously curled his hands into balls of fists. If I had appeared in front of you when you were still a child beggar, would you still react like this? Even though Asda was not speaking rapidly or loudly, Thales felt strangely pressured. Thales took a deep breath. He recalled the child beggars, who were shivering in the 6th house. How he struggled amid the cold and hunger every year. Morris's fierce wolfhound. Quide's hideous expression, and Rick's mysterious smile. Losing yourself in your life as a prince, or struggling and living a miserable life as a child beggar, Asda stared coldly at him. As you tread between the pain and joy of both kinds of existences, have you ever thought of what you really are? When you're stripped of all the definitions given to you by others and you leave all the circumstances that have become your purpose of existence, what do you have left of yourself? A prince who is respected because of his bloodline, a lowly and unfortunate child beggar, a child genius who matured early, a pitiful person who's struggling and trying his best to change his fate. Asda lowered his head to look at Thales' expression. Thales' breathing became increasingly rapid. A respected prince. A lowly child beggar. The magnificent palace where I've lived comfortably without having to worry about food and clothing, with subordinates at my beck and call. The dilapidated abandoned house, the cold and hungry days, as well as the swearing thugs who beat us regularly. The difference is like heaven and earth. Without realizing, he opened his mouth to retort. However, he realized that he was unable to say anything. Thales stared at the floor in a daze. Is this really what I'm thinking? Unable to leave, because I'm reluctant to leave the honored life of a prince. Child, you have to understand that to become a mystic, you will have to wave goodbye to your past, no matter how magnificent or unforgettable it is, and no matter how reluctant you are. Don't let your past tie you down. Only by decisively letting it go will you be able to ascend. The moment you become a mystic, you will understand everything I'm saying right now. Thales subconsciously put his hand on his chest. The burn wound inflicted by the Mindy silver coin seemed to be aching dully again. The inscription on the silver coin appeared in his mind again: a king does not gain respect by virtue of his bloodline. Being a mystic is not an occupation, or a title, Asda said resolutely. Its significance exceeds your wildest imagination. It is a turning point where you can find, understand and remold yourself. Right now, you have the opportunity to make your own choice. The mystic went up to Thales and extended his hand towards Thales' face. You can choose between going back to your original life, which seems real and earnest, but is in reality without choice, freedom, aim and direction. Asda's hand stopped right in front of Thales' nose. He turned his palm over, and a ray of blue light flashed out of it, swirling continuously around the mystic's palm. In the end, a dark blue ball of light was formed. Just like that night in Red Street Market. Or you can choose to listen to your inner voice, the mystic continued saying. And choose to see how far you can go, and what you can achieve. Discover who you really are. Staring at the ball of light in Asda's palm, Thales furrowed his brows tightly. How far I can go. What I can achieve. Discover who I really am. Asda clenched his fist softly. With that, the ball of light in his palm was extinguished. A surge of air then blew past Thales' cheeks. The mystic's gaze changed. This was what my guide told me 1,000 years ago as he led me down the path of being a mystic. I was lost at that time. Thales listened to Asda's words with an unpleasant expression. He dug his fingernails deeper and deeper into his palms. And 1,000 years later, as your guide, I will lead you into becoming the most miraculous creature in this world. Asda nodded slightly. Believe me, eternal life and infinite power are not the only things you will gain as a mystic. Those are just additional perks. Slowly raising his arms, the air mystic's tone was distant and mysterious. The world we see, the view we have, and the things we feel are far greater than what the other creatures can imagine. In the face of that, the glory of the gods, the pride of the priests, and the honor of the kings pale in comparison. The miserable Thales lowered his head. Do I just leave with him like this? True, right now, even though I am of honorable status, the road ahead of me is full of dangers. Even if I stay in Constellation, the fact that I'm a mystic is a hidden peril. Why don't I just? At this moment, Thales' heart jumped, and many faces flashed across his mind. Gilbert's hopeful gaze. Gine's contradictory gaze. The masked protector who held his shoulders tightly. Jala's nonchalant expression. And that night, Thales recalled everything that happened and how because of him, thousands of people in Constellation as well as Extant could continue to enjoy peace and safety from war. Thales sighed. Asda put down his arms and stared at Thales. With a firm gaze, he slowly nodded. We should go now. Thales took a deep breath and raised his head to look at Asda. I need time, he said earnestly. You can't just appear like this all of a sudden and ask me to go with you, let go of everything and forego my life right now to become some inhuman creature that everyone hates. Asda narrowed his eyes. And you didn't even tell me what mystics and mystic energy are. No matter how mysterious and justified your reasons sound, they weren't able to convince me to let go of everything and embrace an unknown future. Thales clenched his fists and gritted his teeth softly. At least, not this way. You have to at least give me enough time to think before making a choice. Or, we can take a step-by-step approach. For example, you can stay in the dark and teach me the relevant knowledge, instead of going far away. The mystic did not say a word for a good 10 seconds. He then shook his head slowly as he stared at Thales. What a pity, I've been patient enough with you, he sighed. However, my patience has now run out. Before Thales could react, he realized that he was floating in the air. Pale with fear, Thales was about to open his mouth when he felt a surge of dizziness. Soon, he noticed that the view before his eyes was spinning, flashing and changing rapidly. No. Wait. I haven't. Amid the rustling wind, coldness seeped into Thales' exposed skin, and the chilly air poured into his mouth as well as his nose. Thales wanted to say something, but he was unable to. He felt himself starting to spin, and he could not tell the sky apart from the ground anymore. Carrying him, Asda flew out of the window. High up in the air, Thales gritted his teeth from the pain. From a tiny bedroom, the view before his eyes became that of hazy snow under the moonlight and majestic mountains. Heroic Spirit Palace got increasingly smaller and farther away in his eyes. Ellipsis. The Star Killer, Nicholas stood in the Hall of Heroes with an unpleasant expression. His gaze was fixated on a hideous pike on the wall shelf. It was the Soul Slayer pike. Buzz, buzz. A low and rapid vibration could be heard. Standing beside Nicholas, a few members of the White Blade Guard stared at the pike in shock. The legendary Soul Slayer pike is vibrating. Narrowing his eyes, Nicholas walked forward and placed his palm on the Soul Slayer pike. The commander of the White Blade Guards felt the sensation beneath his palms. He then heaved a loud sigh. Activate the alarm in Heroic Spirit Palace now. Nicholas raised his head abruptly. His expression was solemn and grave. This is of the highest priority. We are in deep trouble. Next to him, a subordinate furrowed his brows. The highest priority. Still, he nodded respectfully and left. Seal off the palace portcullis that leads to Axe District and Spear District. Make an inventory of all the men who are patrolling, whether they are palace guards or members of the White Blade Guards. Nicholas turned and from his back, he removed a knife, which had a white handle. It was a special knife. The body of the knife was bright silver and its tip was grayish. On the other hand, the spine of the knife was dark and brassy. The curve of the knife was different from that of the white blades exclusive to members of the White Blade Guards. The knife had two curves and a tiny spike rose from between those curves. I want everyone to report back every 5 minutes. In case anyone goes missing, I want to know the position where he was last seen within 5 minutes. Holding his knife, Nicholas's expression was as cold as ice. He ordered his subordinates as he walked, "We are heading to His Majesty's bedroom immediately." The guards who were responsible for passing down orders left immediately. Soon, emergency whistles could be heard everywhere. "What's going on, boss?" Beside Nicholas, his assistant asked with furrowed brows. "The Soul Slayer pike." "Well, things are not looking good." The Star Killer quickened his footsteps. There was a hint of crimson on his pale face. The Soul Slayer pike would not display a warning for no reason. Based on records in the Legend of the White Blade Guards, the last time it rang like this was more than 600 years ago. His assistant's expression froze. More than 600 years ago, the assistant repeated in disbelief. As the orders were transmitted, more and more soldiers, who were walking around passed the order. Their tone was increasingly hurried and the atmosphere became progressively tense. Yes, more than 600 years ago, Nicholas walked calmly towards the king's bedroom. As he raised the knife in his hand, he sternly said, when the Soul Slayer pike was still in King Reikaru's hands during the Battle of Eradication. Ellipsis. Thales struggled desperately amid the rustling wind, trying to look clearly at the scene before his eyes. However, he could only see Asda and his fluttering clothes. A few seconds later, he felt that they were descending at a rapid pace. At this moment, shoosh! An intense and sharp sound rang in the thick of the wind. Thud. A dull thumping sound followed. Before Thales could figure out what was going on, his vision blurred. The next moment, he tumbled onto the soft, snow-covered ground. He felt pain in his shoulders. Damn it! Coughing furiously, Thales lamented his misfortune in his heart and rose from the ground with much effort. Despicable. What's going on? Why did he stop all of a sudden? He shivered from the cold. Shortly after, the Prince of Constellation froze. He strained his neck to look up. Under the moonlight, he realized that a gigantic statue had appeared before his eyes. It seemed to be a few stories high. The statue was one of a heroic warrior. He was wielding a long pike, and he had a valiant as well as compassionate expression on his face. It was Reikaru Extit's statue. Thales realized with a start that they were at the cliff of the sky, the highest point in Dragon Cloud City. Looking around, he realized that the entire of Dragon Cloud City was below his feet. I see. That statue of Reikaru the hero looked so small from down there. But, now that it's right before my eyes. Asda's voice rang at this moment and it jolted Thales out of his thoughts. Did you really think that I wouldn't notice you? Asda sighed, his tone seemed to be filled with dissatisfaction. Whether in Heroic Spirit Palace or up here in the air, I was deliberately avoiding you. In shock, Thales turned his head back and saw that Asda was standing below the statue. He was standing face to face with a dark silhouette, who was a distance away from him. Thales narrowed his eyes and stared at the silhouette. Who is that? I'm really not in the mood to play around with you today, monster who never dies. Asda shook his head, his gaze was sharp. The mystic narrowed his eyes and smiled. Black sword. What? Black. Thales suddenly trembled. Black sword. Thales took a step forward and stared at the silhouette in disbelief. From what he could recall, this nickname signified that legendary. The silhouette stepped out slowly beneath the moonlight. He raised a strange, fully black long sword. Such a coincidence. The expressionless man turned his body a little. His head was slightly lowered, and under the moonlight, only his black garment could be seen. In the darkness, a pair of eyes that shone with a bright light stared back at the mystic. I am not in the mood either. Monster who never dies. Uttering his words softly, the man called Black Sword had an icy cold gaze. Asda. Chapter 164 Chaos begins. So, you are telling me that. Standing in his bedroom, King Nuven put on his crown and armor. 2 rows of white blade guards anxiously stood beside him on guard. The king turned and stared at the leader of his team of personal guards. With authority, he said, something that has not been seen for hundreds of years in Extant has appeared in Dragon Cloud City. King Nuven tucked a saber by his waist. His expression was solemn. A calamity. Wielding a knife, Nicholas's expression was deadly. To be more precise, Your Majesty, it is not just in Dragon Cloud City. According to the Soul Slayer Pike's scope of warning, which is recorded in the Legend of the White Blade Guards, I'm afraid that creature is in Heroic Spirit Palace. The old king contemplated the situation for a few seconds. Very well, at least we now know that those monsters are not just legends. King Nuven's expression became serious. He took huge strides out of his bedroom and the members of the White Blade Guards followed him closely. The old king glanced at the large number of guards outside the door. They were keeping a vigilant eye. What is the present situation? I have already rung the highest priority alarm, and sealed off the gatehouse that leads to Axe region and Spear region. I have also ordered my subordinates to report back regularly. Nicholas shook his head. Unfortunately, until now, no one in the palace has gone missing, or shown any signs of abnormality, be it guards, servants or members of the White Blade Guards. King Nuven turned and glanced at Nicholas with furrowed brows. Unfortunately. Excuse my language, the latter lowered his head slightly. Because of this, we have no way of locating that creature. King Nuven inhaled and nodded. Inform all the archdukes first. They should know why our alarm rang. Then, lock all those drunkards in the banquet hall up, and chase them out in the morning. Summon all the members of the White Blade Guards who are on break. If possible, send someone to Shield District and call Gleeward over. I need him to wield the Soul Slayer Pike. Inform the chief garrison officer, and order him to dispatch all the disciplinary officers under him to patrol various districts and send out signal arrows. Similarly, they must report back regularly. Light the torch on the first gatehouse, and order all the archers to get into position. Do not be stingy on the eternal oil. As the king gave his orders, the guards responsible for passing them down ran back and forth hurriedly. Do not be anxious, lads. The old king continued walking. His eyes shone with a bright light. We are in Extant, Raikuru's homeland. Neither are we living 600-something years ago, nor are we in the Battle of Eradication. These are not the days where those monsters are afraid of nothing anymore. But no matter what, they are the calamities who are talked about in legends, Nicholas said cautiously. The legend of the White Blade Guards talked about how powerful they are. I know that they are powerful. Every single archduke is taught about this. King Nuven's voice was firm. However, if power is everything, why the FCK did we fight in the Battle of Eradication 600 years ago? The old king's expression became solemn, and his gaze was sharp. Of course, Nicholas nodded. His face was pale. After ensuring the safety of the palace, I will extend the search area outside the gatehouse. At this very moment, unknown noises rang from the back of the troop. Whoosh! The guards and the members of the White Blade Guards nervously whipped out their weapons at the same time. They surrounded the king. Watching his subordinates, King Nuven snorted coldly. The guards only relaxed and returned to their usual position after Nicholas reprimanded them. A guard hurried over to pass a message. Your Majesty, it is one of the envoys from Constellation, he insists to see you. The guard shouted. King Nuven furrowed his brows. Soon enough, the vice diplomat of the Constellation diplomat group, Futre Nimain, appeared before the king. The gaunt vice diplomat's face was pale. Ignoring the more than usual number of guards around him, he anxiously said, Your Majesty, there are intruders in your palace. I already know that. King Nuven waved his hand and impatiently said, I am taking care of it. The guards on both sides of the king blocked Futre and signaled him to leave. No, Your Majesty. Grabbing a guard's arm, Futre shouted. Whoever that intruder is. He has kidnapped Prince Thales. King Nuven's expression immediately changed. Nicholas, on the other hand, stared at Futre in a strange manner. He was obviously suspicious. King Nuven stared at Futre and his expression was unpleasant. What happened? King Nuven took a deep breath. Calmly and carefully, he asked, Is anyone else missing? The guards let go of Futre, who was panting heavily. Yes, steadying his breath, Futre dropped another bomb. Your granddaughter is also missing. Miss Saroma Walton. Ellipsis. Such bad luck. Why am I meeting you here? Asda shut his eyes and his tone was filled with dissatisfaction. Since when did the Brotherhood open up a tourist path to Northland? The air mystic mocked. Or is your hatred towards me so strong that even Broken Dragon Fortress can't hold it back? Thales took a deep breath of the cold outdoor air. From Asda's words, he could finally confirm the man's identity. Standing in front of Asda, the man shook his head slowly. Someone told me that I could meet an old friend here. The man did not speak at a rapid pace. However, there was an inexplicable feeling of pressure. I thought he was lying to me. Unexpectedly, I actually ran into you. The man sighed. It seems that sometimes, even lies come true. Staring at the man, Thales could not help but recall his life in the Brotherhood. As the lowest-ranking members of the Blackstreet Brotherhood, the child beggars were lowly beings who often endured beatings and scoldings. However, they were also the future of the Brotherhood. Hence, the internal affairs of the Brotherhood were what the child beggars talked about the most. In the 10 years of the Brotherhood's history, the 13 generals, whom the child beggars were the most familiar with, fought their way to prominence in the last 5 years. All of them shared a few special characteristics. They were mean, fierce and young. On the other hand, the influential and powerful 6 powerhouses were highly experienced people within the Brotherhood. They each held a different business lifeline of the Brotherhood. Every single one of them could be considered as a big player of the kingdom's underground world. However, there was another kind of existence in the Blackstreet Brotherhood, the most powerful, horrifying and unbelievable group. They were undoubtedly the 3 main assassins, who ranked higher than the 6 powerhouses. There were also rumors saying that there were actually 4 assassins. However, the 4th person was so mysterious that there were many versions of his nickname. Whether they were responsible for their own nicknames, or whether it was other people, bizarrely, the 3 main assassins were named after 3 strange weapons. Reversed machete. Prison lock sickle. Black sword. Among them, Black Sword's stories were definitely the most legendary. Thales had heard a few rumors about him. One of them was how all alone, he made a river of blood out of Blackstreet, which used to be occupied by many powers. In the end, he obtained the Brotherhood's established first turf. In another horrifying rumor, the Brotherhood's enemies conspired to kill Black Sword, throwing out ruthless words and substantial rewards. However, they were decapitated when they were in Dreamland. There was even a legendary rumor where, after being bribed, soldiers from the city defense team went to Sunset Pub to capture Black Sword, who was alone at that time. Black Sword sat calmly and just continued eating and drinking, forcing 17 troops of police officers to retreat with only his gaze as well as his movements. The most absurd rumor would be when, determined to take him down, the shrewd and ruthless Blood Bottle Gang ambushed him heavily. They surrounded him with a battle array of a few hundred people and supposedly killed him. However, the very next day, they realized in horror that Black Sword was walking along Blackstreet, totally unharmed. In the stories that circulated among child beggars, thugs and the common people, Black Sword was like a multifaceted and all-powerful legend of the underworld. He was a legend and a symbol of terror in the underworld. In the 10 years of the Blackstreet Brotherhood's history, even the 2 sensational mystics were inferior to Black Sword. Now, the legendary Black Sword was standing in front of Thales just like that. He could not really believe it. Unlike the hideous, fierce, cold and cruel image that the legends gave him, Black Sword's face appeared very plain under the moonlight. He had a flat forehead and small eyes. Even his body size was just slightly above average. He was not fat or thin. In a crowd, he would be an extremely plain person who did not even have any distinguishing characteristic that others could remember him by. It was as if there was nothing presentable about him at all apart from his sharp gaze that did not go with the rest of his style, and his sword. Thales narrowed his eyes and watched as the man slowly raised his sword. It was a strange sword. Its entirely black appearance may have explained Black Sword's nickname. However, this was far from its only strange point. The odd sword was medium in length, and its blade was slightly curved. However, the tip of the sword was curved inwards like the beak of a bird. The blade was single-edged, and there was a deep and long blood groove along the sharp edge. 1/3 into the other edge of the blade, a portion was dug off to produce a reverse hook. The other edge of the blade was also serrated starting from this reverse hook, all the way to the hilt. Staring at the strange, legendary black sword, Thales could not help but furrow his brows. The handle of the strange sword was not aligned with its ridge at all. Instead, it was skewed to one side like a kitchen knife. On top of that, the sword did not have a cross guard. It only had a unilateral hand guard, which extended downwards from the hilt, and it was almost parallel to the handle. It seemed to be just enough for 4 fingers, excluding the thumb. Staring at the sword, Thales criticized it internally. It doesn't look like a sword at all. Instead, it looks more like a long and straight knife with all kinds of little designs on it. Thales could not help but recall the Swiss Army knife from his past life. However, at the same time, Thales was aware that the strange black sword was not Black Sword's only weapon. The latter also had another long weapon that was covered in linen. It was tied to his waist. Is that another sword? And you are just like an annoying black cockroach, insignificant but extremely resilient. Asda's tone was flat, as if he paid no heed at all to the legend in front of him. You were always able to hold on to your last breath and crawl away, then crawl back again at a later date in the most disgusting manner. You just continued to annoy. The man did not reply. His gaze swept past Asda and fell on Thales. Being stared at by those sharp eyes, a chill ran down Thales' spine. These two men are both extremely dangerous, Thales thought. As members of the Brotherhood and Blood Bottle Gang respectively, they're obviously enemies. Perhaps, there will be an opportunity for me to escape Asda. All these years, I've been watching as you went from super class to supreme class, and became increasingly powerful. Staring at Black Sword, Asda shook his head a little. I'm almost getting attached to you. Black Sword still did not say a word. You know, standing still in front of me is the stupidest thing to ever do. Asda paid no heed at all to Black Sword's rudeness. He smiled and said, during this period of time, I can totally take all the air in your body and... However, before Asda could finish talking, Black Sword moved. Treading across the accumulated snow below his feet, Black Sword charged towards Asda with one hand wielding his sword and another shielding his chest. Asda smiled ever so slightly, not taking it seriously at all. Thales was shocked. Ever since that night in Red Street Market, he had witnessed the movements and skills of many elite fighters, ranging from the super class to supreme class. All of them had their own distinguishing features. There was Yodel, who came and went like a shadow, Chris, who could transform into blood mist, and Ida, who was so quick and noble that it was hard to track her movements with the naked eye. There were also the Corleone sisters, who were so fast that they could not even be seen clearly during battles, the Fortress Flower, who could move freely despite carrying her heavy weapon, and the unstoppable Kingdom's Wrath. Every single one of them was memorable. Even Ralph's posture as he flew along with the wind, Icetrone's extremely quick movements, and Nikolai, the Red Viper's heavy punches that increased in speed with time, all had their own distinguishing characteristics. However, staring at Black Sword, who was charging forward at a moderate pace, Thales furrowed his brows. It was not because of how sharp or dazzling his movements were. Instead, as Black Sword ran, his movements were too common. They were so common that he seemed like the most ordinary soldier charging towards the most powerful opponent. There was no distinguishing characteristic at all. Even Jala's precise movements as she leapt seemed more advanced than that of Black Sword's. Compared to the legends I've heard about Black Sword. Wait. Thales then thought of something. The most ordinary soldier, the most powerful opponent. He narrowed his eyes and saw Black Sword's movements clearly. Black Sword's hand was raised high to shield his chest, and he dragged his sword behind him. The distance between his legs. Thales began to remember something. This move is so familiar. Once again, Thales used his special vision to observe the scene before him. As expected, through his eyes, Asda was a bright ray of blue light. But strangely, Black Sword looked exactly the same as he did with no changes whatsoever. However, Thales did not have the time to care about all of this. Standing still and staring at the approaching Black Sword, Asda snapped his fingers softly. Click. Thales felt a surge of panic. Swoosh. The next moment, piles of accumulated snow on the ground between Asda and Black Sword suddenly flew off. All the snow dispersed, revealing a layer of grayish-black rock formation. Through his special vision, Thales could see a surge of energy tinted with blue light, rising all of a sudden. It swept towards the charging man from the midpoint between them. Thales' pupils contracted, and he immediately realized that the surge of energy was air current, the most chaotic air current ever. It was more than 10 meters in height, and dozens of meters in width. There were many layers to it and it was like a moving wall. It stood between Asda and Black Sword, completely covering a portion of the summit. It swept up plenty of accumulated snow and rolled violently towards the charging Black Sword. Shoosh. It was akin to a huge racket swatting a tiny fly. *T. Thales furrowed his brows anxiously. Black Sword can only see the fluttering snow. He can't see the invisible air current. No matter which direction he moves in, it will be impossible for Black Sword to avoid this impeccable attack. Unless he goes underground. Seeing the situation clearly, Thales blurted out, "Careful, there is a wall made of strong wind in front of you. Dodge it quick." Asda moved slightly and turned his head back to glance at Thales. His gaze was a ruminating one. As for Black Sword, he did not seem to be aware of it at all. He continued charging forward. Thales gritted his teeth. He can't hear me because of the air current. The air current will sweep him away. He'll be swept off the cliff. And he'll fall to the ground from the highest peak of Dragon Cloud City. Thales felt dejected. Black Sword is probably my only chance to escape from Asda. If he lives, he can at least report back. However, Thales could only watch helplessly as Black Sword charged straight into the invisible wall. Towards his death. Finally, Black Sword entered the chaotic air current. His hair was blown backwards by the wind, and his clothes fluttered. It seemed like the air current was going to sweep him away. Yet, in the next moment, Thales opened his mouth wide in astonishment. Black Sword was not swept away. Swaying amid the air current, he held his sword with both hands and pointed it to the front. Abruptly turning his body sideways, Black Sword started to move in a strange way. He did not charge forward in a straight line anymore. Instead, he started to advance in a zigzag pattern, according to the direction of the tip of his sword. Just like that, with the sword in his hands, Black Sword continued to charge towards Asda amid the air current, which was strong enough to even sweep large boulders away. Even though he kept changing directions, his speed was not reduced at all. He was like a peg that lodged itself into the air current, moving deeper and deeper within. Thales looked at Black Sword's movements in disbelief. How is this possible? Why is he not affected by Asda's air current at all? Narrowing his eyes, Thales started to concentrate on the fluctuations within his body, so that his vision would become clearer. Soon, Thales understood why. Via his special vision, Thales could see that Black Sword was not staggering without direction. Amid the air current, which sparkled with blue light, he systematically moved towards certain spots. They were almost always the sparsest and dimmest parts. Through some unknown method, Black Sword already had a clear grasp of the air current. He found the sparsest spots of the uneven air current that Asda controlled and he somehow squeezed through it. Thales could not help but feel puzzled. Normal people can't see the air current at all, let alone when they're inside it. How does he do it? As Black Sword's opponent, Asda did not seem surprised at all. He only moved his fingers slightly. Through Thales' vision, the air current, which sparkled with blue light, became brighter in the blink of an eye. The air current suddenly became a few times stronger and Black Sword halted his steps abruptly. It seemed like he was about to get swept away. At the same time, Black Sword moved his strange long sword. He drew an arc with his sword in the thick of the chaotic air current. Thales widened his eyes. With the back of his Black Sword struck a dim spot in the midst of the bright blue light. Thales was getting confused by all this Black Sword and Black Sword business. Asda's expression changed a bit. The air current lost its momentum due to the strike. Thales could clearly see that at that moment, the man used his sword to tear an opening in the air current. In the blink of an eye, Black Sword leapt from the ground and exited the air current through the tiny, unstable opening. He was like a legend who suddenly came back to life. In a split second, Black Sword was almost right in front of Asda. Without stopping, he stared coldly at Asda. At that point, Asda raised his hands abruptly. For some unknown reason, Thales could feel that Asda's movements were a little panicky. The next moment, it was as if the air around Asda suddenly exploded. Boom! A large amount of air exploded outwards with Asda at the center. The only thing Thales could see was blue light propagating outwards in a sphere around Asda. At that time, Thales thought of a funny analogy. Asda looked like an exasperated porcupine that was furiously shooting its quills at the charging Black Sword. Thales was pressed onto the ground by a force in the air and his thoughts returned to the present. Thales knew that it was Asda's doing. It was to protect him from the exploding air. Gritting his teeth, he raised his head to see the battle clearly. Snowflakes were raging in the air. A few steps in front of Asda, Black Sword was the first to bear the brunt of the mighty explosion. Then, Black Sword did something unexpected again. He apparently knew what he was up against. As he charged forward, he started to spin. Astonished, Thales was fixated on Black Sword. Tear. Grazing past the highly pressurized air, his body produced a loud and shrill sound. He continued spinning like an odd dancer as he advanced, surrounded by the exploding air. At the same time, he skillfully reduced the frontal pressure on him to the lowest. Black Sword spun his body twice. Perfectly balanced, each spin brought him one step closer to Asda. The air pressure did not affect his speed at all. Amid the shrill explosion and Asda's solemn gaze, Black Sword went up to him. At that instant, the air mystic in Black Sword's eyes met. The next moment, with an unpleasant expression, Asda raised his right hand and clenched his fist. Conversely, Black Sword thrust his strange sword forward. A peculiar change started happening to the air around them. Black Sword drew a weird arc with his long sword. Slash. The sound of blade against flesh could be heard. However, as Black Sword waved his sword, Asda simultaneously clenched his fist, and the air around them suddenly became extremely thick, heavy and doughy. This reminded Thales of the time Asda suffocated him. It sent a chill down his spine. Thud. Asda's right arm where he clenched his fist detached from his body and dropped to the ground. Boom. Black Sword kneeled on the ground with one knee as a result of the strong force in the surrounding air. With his left hand propped on the ground, Black Sword did a backflip without waiting for his opponent's reaction. Concurrently, he waved his long sword and tore open the heavy layer of air around them. Flipping a few meters back and leaving the range of Asda's air pressure, Black Sword held his sword in front of his cheat. Panting, he stared vigilantly at Asda. Alternatively, the air mystic stared at his fallen arm in a daze. The dramatic duel finally ended for now. Thales got up from the ground. He was so absorbed in the duel that he almost forgot to breath. Asda's ability to control atmospheric air at will was already astonishing enough to him with the sweeping air current and violent exploding air. Plus, how did the air suddenly become doughy and thick? Anyone else would have fled in a panic when faced with a situation like that. Despite that, Black Sword could detect all the flaws in Asda's strange abilities within a short amount of time. Conquering every obstacle, he got in front of the mystic. He even chopped off the mystic's arm. Unlike Giza who bled a lot, there was not a single drop of blood on Asda's wound. Just like that time in Red Street Market, it shone with a dim blue light instead. The air mystic was stumped for more than 10 seconds. On the other hand, Black Sword used that period of time to regulate his breathing. Finally, the strange mystic heaved a loud sigh and slowly said, "Ever since we first met, this is the closest you've gotten to me. You even chopped off my arm." Asda shook his head and moved his severed arm. "Whether it's your reaction time, physical qualities or intuition, I must admit that you are getting better." "I take back what I said about you being a black cockroach," Asda said mockingly. "You are now a poisonous black scorpion." Black Sword fixed his eyes on the mystic and did not reply. "In addition, ever since I first met him 12 years ago, his ability has been rapidly increasing, as though he experiences no bottlenecks and obstacles at all," Asda thought. At that time, he was insignificant. But now, Thales' blood froze as he watched Asda's severed arm transform into blue light and disappear. Even though it was not new to him, and he had already expected it to happen, Thales still found it a little strange. At the same time, blue light shone again in the position of Asda's severed arm and converged to form a new arm. It even included his sleeve. A mortal who is able to fight a mystic head-on without being on the losing end, Asda touched his regenerated arm and sighed. "Black Sword, you're probably the first one in history." Recalling his life of more than 1,000 years, Asda could not help but sigh. Throughout history, have there been any supreme class elites with this sort of ability? Having heard this, Thales stared at Black Sword in a daze. The latter rose up slowly and flipped off the snowflakes on his long sword. "I'm flattered." Black Sword's tone was still flat. "However, I could feel that you were deliberately holding back your power." Black Sword raised his head and looked at Reikaru's statue. He furrowed his brows slightly. "In the past, you would have blasted the entire summit into pieces." Asda narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Black Sword turned his head back and stared straight into the mystic's eyes. "Is there something you dread in this city?" Thales furrowed his brows. "Of course." Asda mentioned that there are at least 2 legendary anti-mystic equipment in Dragon Cloud City. Asda flashed a faint smile. "This is after all, the capital city of a kingdom. There must be order." The air mystic shrugged and said nonchalantly. "I don't intend for there to be a citywide massacre, I don't like that." Capital city, order. Black Sword took a deep breath. At that moment, his expression became extremely scary. "Why didn't you have such consideration 12 years ago when you were killing everyone in Renaissance Palace, you monster?" Thales shuddered. However, what Asda said next was equally shocking to him. "Tisk, tisk, isn't this a little too ironic coming from you?" Staring at Black Sword, Asda shook his head and flashed another little smile. A hint of blue light surged in his eyes. "If I remember correctly, weren't you the one who assassinated the Crown Prince?" Chapter 165 Just Speak. Under the moonlight, the two men stared at each other in silence. Thales looked at Asda in disbelief, then at Black Sword. "What? A massacre, in Renaissance Palace? The royal family was killed?" In Thales' memories, there was only one incident which had both of the described events happening at the same time. Thales swallowed and his brain revolved frantically. These two men, what roles did they play in the bloody year? Asda maintained his chilling smile, but this time, his smile seemed to be laced with another emotion. "It's time to set things right." A strange blue light surfaced in Asda's eyes, and it only grew brighter with each passing moment. "This time, I will solve this problem of yours, once and for all." As his voice fell, Asda changed. Thales stared in shock as he watched the blue light in Asda's eyes overflow like a creek, branching into several streams. It blanketed his entire face. From afar, Asda's skin now looked chapped and cracked. The blue light flashed from beneath and the whole thing was extremely strange. A chilling sensation grew in Thales' heart. In that instant, he felt that Asda did not only change in appearance, his entire being was a little different. "What's going on? Your luck runs dry here," the mystic who had blue light flowing across his face slowly said. But this time, it felt as if all emotion had faded from his words. There was no trace of fluctuation in his tone whatsoever. "You will never have the opportunity of coming near me again." He was just like a stiff puppet. Black Sword gradually raised his brows. Apparently, he had seen this side of Asda before. Black Sword slowly stroked the ridge of his sword with his left hand. With a slight bend of his knees, he lowered his body and posed in a position that felt familiar yet different to Thales. "That was just a trial earlier," Black Sword plainly said. The tip of his sword was pointed at the peculiar-looking Asda. "Regardless of what you're trying out, it all ends here." The mystic was expressionless, without a trace of anger in his tone. The words that traveled between his lips flowed with a blue light from time to time. The next moment, without a word, Black Sword pounced. The mystic, who was flashing in blue light, did not even look at his opponent. He just stared straight ahead with a vacant look in his eyes. Black Sword's assault was significantly faster than the last time. Within a few seconds, he was already 10 steps away from Asda. The mystic slowly raised his hand in the direction of Black Sword's assault. Black Sword let out a low growl. His entire body leaned forward as a force rushed from his legs. The speed of his assault accelerated again. Air is ubiquitous, the mystic's abnormal, indifferent voice slowly rang. It fills your entire body from the inside out. Thales had his eyes wide open. He had a feeling that something was about to happen. Sure enough, the moment Asda seemed to unconsciously raise his right hand, Black Sword's figure swayed violently. His speed immediately decreased. All the air in your lungs has condensed, none shall enter or exit. The blue light on the air mystic's face glowed brighter. You won't be able to inhale a thing. Black Sword's facial expression changed. He clutched his chest desperately with his left hand. Thales' mouth hung open in shock. What? The air in the human body? Can Asda actually go to this extent? Sure enough, Black Sword seemed to have suffered a huge blow. He began to turn red in the face and eyes. His movements were distorted and even his feet began to shake. Thales looked at him with concern, his only chance of escape. Black Sword propped his sword on the ground as he lowered his head and gritted his teeth. At the next second, Thales could see within his field of vision that the scene surrounding Black Sword suddenly blurred. In that instance, some form of power appeared to obstruct Thales' field of view, confounding him in the process. However, reality did not allow Thales to linger on in his thoughts. Black Sword had extracted his sword from the ground right before his eyes. His stagnated movements seemingly smoothed out at that moment. Black Sword's figure actually recovered its original speed as he continued his assault towards Asda. Questions arose in Thales' heart. What did Black Sword do? A good response, the mystic's plain and expressionless voice rang again as he answered Thales' question. Strengthening by the power of eradication, urging muscles related to breathing to forcibly breathe in small amounts of air. Black Sword's figure swayed, he stumbled in his footsteps as he rushed up to Asda. Like a drunken man, his movements lost the ease of his first assault. Thales was very concerned that he might fall at any time. Moreover, Thales frowned. If not for the legendary anti-mystic equipment, Asda would have. The mystic did not seem to care about Black Sword. With an unmatched indifference, he said, "It will only allow you to live for a dozen more seconds." Black Sword stared at Asda, who was flashing in blue light. He clenched his jaws as he looked like he was enduring an unprecedented amount of pain. He raised the strange sword in his hands at Asda. The streams of light on the mystic's face flowed in blue rays once again. Immediately after, the mystic's eyes shone with immense blue light. Nobody could clearly see the expression in his eyes. Thales saw the air surrounding Asda beginning to emit starry specks of faint blue light. Once more, a heavy pressure fell upon the air around them. No, Thales gritted his teeth and took a step back, maintaining his field of vision. This time, it's not as simple as heavy pressure. Boom. A muffled sound rang. Thales watched in terror as the event unfolded. With Asda as the center, the snow in a circular area surrounding him sunk. The sunken layer was visible to the naked eye. It looked like it had been forcibly slammed in by someone. Boom. Black Sword sunk to his knees uncontrollably. Relentless, Black Sword clung to his sword. The point of his sword was just a few inches away from Asda. He knelt in front of Asda and gritted his teeth as he growled softly. His left hand supported him from the ground, but it trembled continuously. As though burdened with weights by the tens of thousands, he could not move. Shing. Black Sword could not help withdrawing his sword. He forcibly pierced the tip of his sword into the ground as he braced himself from being crushed. This is bad. I've made a wrong estimation. Black Sword is no match for Asda at all. Thales clenched his fist as his heart paced with nervousness. But, with such a huge commotion, surely there's bound to be someone who's noticed already. See, once your body has been set back, your reflexes will slow down. The mystic spit his words out mechanically. His voice was calm. You will become much easier to deal with. Black Sword knelt on the ground as he growled begrudgingly. Never-ending luck has allowed you to fully live an extra 12 years, you've always been able to manage a narrow escape. But this time, you have no comrade who will trade his life to create an opportunity for you to kill me. As blue light flowed over the air mystic's face once again, he slowly said, you have no comrade who will trade his life to save you either. At that moment, Black Sword looked up with much difficulty. His eyes burned with hatred and fury. Monster, he relentlessly said through his teeth. The mystic shook his head in indifference. He lifted his right hand and kneaded his fist silently. In Thales' eyes, the specks of blue light in the air started to brighten. The air surrounding Asda tightened with a terrifying force. Clank. The strange sword that belonged to Black Sword bore several inches deeper into the ground. An ear-piercing sound was released as the sword's ridged end ground against the rock strata. Black Sword's body was gradually being pressured downwards. His left hand and his two legs that were supporting him contracted uncontrollably towards his own torso. Thales felt his skin crawl. He remembered the mystic's favorite trick, kneading flesh into a human meatball. I've experienced this personally before, haven't I? The trembling of Black Sword's body became increasingly vigorous and his body contracted unceasingly at the condensing air pressure. His bones started to snap. And a painful howl escaped from Black Sword. Yet, his right hand remained firmly on the hilt of his sword. As if it was life itself. We're done for. Thales sighed. But at this very moment, in Thales' field of view, Black Sword's figure blurred again. The second prince's heart dropped. Based on the events earlier, this means that Black Sword. Crack. A strange sound came from underground. The mystic seemed to have realized something and his shining eyes turned as his face flashed a brilliant blue. You. At the next second, a crisp crack came from the ground Black Sword had been crawling on. It started from where he forcibly pierced the ground with his sword. Boom. Beneath Black Sword, the ground abruptly split open. Crash. His entire living being sunk into the cracked rock strata. The air mystic turned his head sharply, the blue light in his eyes flashed really quickly. In that instant, Thales could clearly see that Black Sword was twisting the sword he had relentlessly held on to, dragging it horizontally on the ground. He created a hole on the surface of rock. The terrifying air pressure seemed to have found a vent as it bore into the hole, breaking open the entire rock strata. Following that, more and more air permeated the gradually cracking interior of the rock. Shortly after, the heavy air pressure around them suddenly reduced. Thales was stunned. If this is the case. Sure enough, Black Sword who had been huddled on the ground was relieved of this restriction of air. He stepped on the continuously sinking rock as his figure suddenly emerged above ground. At that moment, the eyes of the risen Black Sword were bright, pure and steady. He cast his gaze on the expressionless mystic, and looked straight into the latter's eyes, which were shining with immense blue light. Black Sword inched forward again, getting a step closer to Asda. The mystic suddenly lifted both of his hands a little. His figure flew backwards at the push of the air. It appeared like he was escaping from Black Sword. But before he could drift too far away, a terrifying tremble erupted from Black Sword's right hand. A strange power surged. In the middle of the chaotic air flow, the sword in Black Sword's hand traveled towards Asda with unmatched steadiness, power and accuracy. Thales took a deep breath as he watched Black Sword's instantaneous counterattack. The point of his sword was about to pierce Asda's head. However, the blue light on Asda's face shone brightly once again. Clank. There was a sound of blunt impact. It sounded like sword just crashed into the hardest metal. It was blocked by a strange, transparent barrier right before the tip of Asda's nose. Thales frowned. He saw a blue barrier appearing before Asda's body, blocking Black Sword's weapon. Air wall, he said to himself as he looked at the blue ball of light in Asda's left hand. You've always been able to find a way to live in the face of desperation, the mystic said soullessly. That was a beautiful counterattack. Black Sword roared in fury. With great force beneath his feet, his body rushed to the front as his sword pierced forward. Asda flew back. The sword still hovered unwaveringly in front of him, seemingly unable to break through the air wall barrier. Nonetheless, it looked as though Black Sword was pushing Asda backwards. However, something startled Thales. They're flying towards me. Trying to kill me once again. The mystic's voice was cold and quiet as though a sword was not before his eyes, but a mere fly. You've known ever since day one that I can't be killed. Then why do you need to defend yourself? Black Sword's eyes were wide open with fury. He held his sword with both hands. His footsteps were incessant, as if he would pledge his life to break the air wall barrier. It's just a habit. The mystic floated backwards and plainly said, I don't like others to come close to me. Thales felt his skin crawl as he watched them floating over. He just wanted to flee. But at this moment, the state of the affairs changed again. Black Sword suddenly retracted his sword, and he turned around rapidly. With a final stomp of his foot, he gave up thrusting his sword forward and he left Asda's side altogether. The streams on the mystic's face flared as he did not expect Black Sword's actions. In the next second, Black Sword rolled sideways and fell to Thales' side. Thales was surprised. Before he could react, he felt pressure tightening on his shoulder. He turned his head around. Feeling astounded, he realized that Black Sword was standing behind him and holding his left shoulder firmly. How? Thales' brain was a sea of confusion. Black Sword. The air mystic had been lackadaisical since the beginning, as if he had lost all emotions. He now roared stressfully for the first time, don't you dare. Asda put down his left hand, maintaining the air wall and raising his right. In that instant, Thales felt a coldness on his neck. That peculiar, Black Sword was at his throat. Asda's hand halted midair. Thales could hear Black Sword's cough ringing in his ear. It caused his heart to palpitate continuously. Thales then came to his senses. Is Black Sword holding me hostage? Thales strongly resisted his desire to curse as a sense of bitterness arose in his heart. Must I be this unlucky? Observing it all, the rays on the air mystic's face flashed more and more violently. He frowned. You always surprise me. I told you, it was just a trial earlier, to make sure that my skills didn't decline. Black Sword coughed and spit out a mouthful of blood. Your response hasn't changed much either. Then, I just found this opportunity. Black Sword panted as he tightened the hand that was clutching Thales. This boy is of importance to you. The blue light in the mystic's eyes faded, revealing the expression in his eyes. The streams of light on Asda's face gradually dissipated as well. Thales flashed him an unsightly smile. He thought of shrugging his shoulders, but they were detained by Black Sword. He could not move an inch. Even if you cut his throat open, I can still use air pressure to seal the bleeding. Asda looked at Black Sword, who was holding Thales, and solemnly said, you know that this is futile. Upon hearing that, Thales breathed a sigh of relief. Until he heard Black Sword's following words. Right, Black Sword sighed. He flipped his sword to the ridged side and kept his grip on Thales. So, I'll just cut off his entire head. Can you put him back together then? Thales stopped breathing. What? Go ahead and try it. Asda's brows relaxed. He did not seem to care as the rays of coldness in his eyes shot in all directions. Threatening a mystic, you and your Black Street Brotherhood, just wait and see the price I will make you pay. Black Sword snorted lightly. The sword in his hand gradually approached the boy's neck. Asda watched his movements, and his brows slowly sank. Wait a minute. The crisp voice of a boy rang. Black Sword and Asda collectively paused. The both of them turned their gazes around. In Black Sword's grip, Thales yelled as he felt his skin crawl, the two of you. Just talk things out first. Chapter 166 Surprise. Next to the tip of the sword, Thales tried his best to control his heartbeat and breathing. He looked at the mystic with difficulty. Mr. Sakern, I reckon that you don't want to waste time here, am I right? Yes, Asda said flatly. I will kill this man right now. It's the fastest way. HMPH. Black Sword sneered. Same here. Thales' head hurt. Mr. Black Sword. Panting, Thales said to the person holding him hostage, you know that this man cannot be killed, right? Behind him, Black Sword's breathing grew steady. Who knows, Black Sword said flatly, perhaps, the very next strike might just kill him. Asda snorted in a mocking manner and stared coldly at Black Sword. The fact that the both of them refused to give face to the other made Thales feel extremely awkward. Thales sighed. I have a suggestion for the both of you. Feeling the metallic chill on his neck, Thales forced a smile. Mr. Black Sword, perhaps you don't have to chop my head off. Asda narrowed his eyes, his gaze was indecipherable. Look, the both of you already had a fight. Thales could not see Black Sword's face, however he knew that his own expression was definitely horrible. He tried his best to steady his voice amid the chilly air. Mr. Mystic here had a slight edge, but Mr. Black Sword has always been full of surprises. Staring at each other, Asda and Black Sword's gazes were merciless as well as murderous. It will only attract Dragon Cloud City's attention if the both of you continue with your stalemate here. Thales trembled slightly. Mister, why don't you let me go and just disappear? In Mr. Sakern, Thales smiled awkwardly. Since my life is in his hands, why don't you have mercy and let him go? The most important thing right now is to get myself away from the tip of his sword. I was counting on Black Sword's sudden appearance to work in my favor. Turns out, none of them are good people, Thales thought. Beneath the moonlight, the chilly wind slowly died down, and the surrounding snow became lesser and lesser. Black Sword did not say anything. Thales was numb with cold. He tried his best to maintain his smile. What do you think? Asda's eyes met with the prince. Thales felt a chill running down his spine. Even though the mystic's current state was a lot better than the time he was sparkling earlier on, Thales could still feel the coldness in Asda's eyes. I refuse, Asda said coldly. I've had enough of this cat and mouse game. He must die here today. Thales' smile froze. Hey. Thales stared at Asda in disbelief. What about the love and fraternity between mystics? Asda paid no heed to Thales' gaze. At this moment, the mystic's heart was ice cold. Black Sword's ability earlier proves that he is totally qualified to become a part of those calamity hunters from over 600 years ago. The only thing he needs is a legendary anti-mystic equipment. Long ago, those top supreme class fighters were carefully picked from various races. They were all well-seasoned, fearsome individuals. Each wielding a legendary anti-mystic equipment, they concealed themselves on the battlefield, waiting to strike a fatal blow. In the grand cleanup after the battle, they became fearsome trackers who hid in the shadows. They tracked everyone down, regardless of stance and faction. If it wasn't for the separation of the peninsulas and the political divide between kingdoms after the battle, which separated the calamity hunters. Black Sword. Staring at his regenerated right hand, Asda narrowed his eyes. Black Sword must die here. Look, child, of course I can let you go, Black Sword said softly in Thales' ear. But he doesn't want to. The Brotherhood's leader shook his head a little and gently sighed. You can only blame your luck. Thales exhaled in exasperation. Asda sneered and said, let's see how long a mere human can last in this Northland winter. True, not showing any signs of weakness, Black Sword tapped Thales on the shoulder. How long do you think he can last? Caught in between them, Thales furrowed his brows in resignation. What the hell? Thales took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. Deep in contemplation, he glanced down at Dragon Cloud City. There's no other way. I know. Thales took a deep breath and licked his dry lips. Enunciating each word clearly, he said, why don't we do this? I have an idea. Black Sword and Asda focused their attention on him. With a sullen face, Thales slowly said, Mr. Black Sword, with this way, you will have enough time to flee. I believe that you can. While we can continue our journey, Mr. Sakern. Listening to Thales' words, both Asda and Black Sword furrowed their brows. HMPH, Asda sneered, are you helping him? No. Thales felt the grip on his shoulder loosen. Once again, he curled up the corners of his lips and spoke with an even brighter smile, I am helping all of us. Asda's gaze became increasingly colder. It sent another chill down Thales' spine. A gust of cold wind blew past and Black Sword let out a soft sigh. I have been looking for such an opportunity since the beginning, Black Sword slowly said, next to Thales' ears. Thank you for your suggestion, child. So, you agree. Thales awkwardly inched his neck away from the serration on the sword's blade. Staring at Asda, who had an unpleasant expression, Black Sword tapped Thales' shoulder and nodded slowly. Of course, but there's an improvement that needs to be made. Thales froze. Improvement? I came to find him. Black Sword widened his eyes. Grabbing Thales, he rose abruptly. I didn't come here to flee. Asda's expression changed. He immediately extended his right hand. However, Black Sword was faster than him. Swiftly, the legendary man from the Brotherhood picked Thales up by the collar and flung him off the cliff. Arg! Thales could open his mouth. Wind and snow flooded his oral cavity. Is this a joke? Feeling the wind, Thales was extremely terrified. Narrowing his eyes and looking downwards, Thales saw Dragon Cloud City at a bird's-eye view. He shouted loudly and indignantly. At least give me a signal. Growling in a low voice, Black Sword rose again. He charged towards Asda. The cold wind glazed past Thales' ears, preventing him from opening his eyes. However, he could feel his upward momentum reducing. A ball of light appeared on Asda's left palm. Clang. With his blade, Black Sword slashed at the wall of air in front of Asda again. After a fraction of a second, Thales realized that he was falling towards Dragon Cloud City. A chill ran down his spine. His forearm was about the distance of an adult's height from the edge of the cliff. Damn you, Black Sword. I didn't ask you to fling me so far away. And, I wanted you to take the opportunity to flee when Asda rescues me. What if Asda doesn't rescue me in time? Fortunately, Asda paid no heed to Black Sword. Raising his head calmly, he extended his right hand towards Thales. The next moment, Thales felt a strange, but great force lifting his body. He immediately stopped falling. Floating midair and having escaped the fate of falling down a cliff that was almost 100 meters high, Thales was badly shaken. He had just avoided becoming a pile of minced meat. However, the battle on the cliff was still ongoing. Black Sword spun around, relying on his inertia, his entire body burst forth with a strange power. Monster! Roaring furiously, Black Sword waved his sword with full force. The blade of his sword approached the wall of air before the mystic. Under Asda's disbelieving gaze, Black Sword blazed the air with his sword. There was also a shrill and intense sound of an explosion. Sizzle. With his eyes wide, Thales watched as Black Sword slashed the sparsest spot of the air wall, which sparkled with blue light. It sent a shock wave across the air wall. Black Sword then rapidly withdrew his long sword and thrust it forward again in the blink of an eye. A sudden surge of immense, colorless energy was concentrated on the man's sword. Clang. The sword hit the air wall, which was already starting to become unstable. Black Sword then spun his sword. His gaze was firm. The massive energy converged in a tiny spot. The next moment. Bang. Amid Asda's flustered and exasperated roars, the sturdy as well as invisible air wall shattered. Whoosh. It turned into chaotic air currents that swept up countless flakes of snow. Trying to create a new air wall, Asda conjured up some blue light on his palm. However, at that moment, there was no more barrier between Black Sword and Asda. Thales raised his brows. Black Sword did not wave his sword again. Instead, he placed his hand on his other weapon, which was tied to his waist. It was the weapon that was wrapped tightly in linen. Within a fraction of a second, Black Sword unwrapped the linen cloth and took out the weapon. It was a peculiar hand-and-a-half sword. No, it was slightly smaller than a hand-and-a-half sword. It was only the same length as Black Sword's forearm. Its tip was scarlet, and its blade was dark red. Its hilt was black and it had a pretty big pommel. A dark red stone was also embedded in the middle of its cross guard. Its knuckle guard was in a reverse arc and it extended towards the direction of the tip. On the knuckle guard, there were a few bulges that pointed in the opponent's direction. Those look like fangs. For some unknown reason, the moment Thales saw the sword, his whole body broke out in goosebumps and his blood ran cold. Thales felt an inexplicable and indescribable feeling. This feeling, why is it so familiar? Thales felt puzzled. However, before he could think any further, Black Sword began to thrust the little red sword into the middle of Asda's stomach. It was as if time had stopped at that moment. Asda stared at the little red sword as it pierced into his stomach. There was shock and panic in his eyes. This is... He looked just like he did when Yodel pierced through his body in Red Street Market. Floating midair, Thales was astonished. He had no more energy to care about the fact that he was in a dangerous position. At that moment, he knew what the weapon in Black Sword's hand was. No, why do you have it? How did you know? Asda stared at the little red sword in disbelief. Black Sword did not answer. Twisting his hand, he moved the sword upwards. The blade of the sword sliced Asda's upper body open, starting from his abdomen and exiting the top of his head. Soon after, Asda's sliced body emitted a bright blue light. Tear. Without mercy, Black Sword waved his sword again and chopped Asda into two by the waist. Severed into two, Asda fell to the ground. He had a shocked expression. Farewell. With one sword in each hand, Black Sword turned around coldly. Monster. The next moment, the force, which had been lifting Thales up, disappeared. *T. Thales felt a surge of panic. Asda's ability has lost its effect. He plunged towards Dragon Cloud City. Thales' heart palpitated as he looked at the tiny city beneath him. His body continued to fall. At this very moment. Cling. The sharp sound of metal rubbing against stone rang. Raising his head, Thales' entire body quivered. He saw Black Sword charging towards him. And then, with a steely gaze, Black Sword extended his right hand. However, that hand was holding a long sword. He thrusted the strange black sword towards Thales, who was plunging downwards in the air. Thales' pupils contracted. What? The sword did not stop. It was going straight for his head. The wind glazed past Thales' ears. Within a fraction of a second, he experienced an array of emotions. Why? Why does he want to kill me? In a trance, Thales stared at the sword that was about to pierce his head. Amid all the surprise, fear, bewilderment and fury, he could only shut his eyes helplessly in the end. Tear. The strange sword pierced through Thales' clothes. His pupils immediately contracted. However, the expected sensation of pain did not arrive. The wind roared. Trembling, Thales opened his eyes. He was still up in the air, and Dragon Cloud City lay quietly about 100 meters beneath him. Shivering, Thales turned his head. To his astonishment, he saw that the blade of the strange sword had pierced through his collar. He was hanging from its reverse hook. Dangling from the sword, Thales swung back and forth in the air. Cold wind continued to glaze past him. He stared wide-eyed at the plain-looking man on the other end of the sword. Black Sword was holding on to his little red sword, which had been lodged into the rock of the cliff. Just like that, his entire body hung beside the cliff. His other hand was extended parallel to his body and it held the strange black sword with little Thales hanging on its hook. The plain-looking man gritted his teeth and slowly lifted the sword. Still in shock, Thales stared at Black Sword in a daze. The latter flashed a smile and flatly said, I gave you a signal before I flung you off the cliff. Widening his eyes due to the fear and shock, Thales could not reply at all. Feeling the pull on his collar, Thales did not dare to look down. He could only press his hand against his chest. It felt as though his heart would have jumped out if he had not done that. Black Sword's expression remained the same. He lifted the sword up steadily with his strong arm. A few seconds later, Thales finally felt a little less anxious, seeing that he was getting nearer to Black Sword. Phew. He breathed a big sigh of relief. At that moment, Thales only wanted to throw insults at Black Sword. What the hell was that? Panting heavily, Thales weakly said, next time, can you? However, before he could finish his sentence, Thales widened his eyes again. Feeling a chill down his spine, he raised his head and looked behind Black Sword. It can't be. There, a strange blue light was coalescing. Under the moonlight, an eccentric figure began to form. Standing to Black Sword's left and staring at the little red sword, the figure's expression was full of complexity. Thales' mouth was wide open. Is this really happening? Hanging next to the cliff, Black Sword saw Thales' expression. His face froze. He soon realized what was happening. Furrowing his brows, Black Sword turned his head slowly and looked up the cliff. There, Asda Sakern stood, completely intact. The air mystic's expression was extremely unpleasant. However, his tone was still a mocking one. Next time, before you frighten me, make sure you have an actual legendary anti-mystic equipment, instead of a counterfeit. Black Sword's expression changed. He glanced to the left at the completely intact Asda, and then to the right at Thales. Hanging from the sword, Thales did not know whether to cry or laugh. Black Sword heaved a loud sigh. Hanging by the cliff, Black Sword shut his eyes and shook his head in resignation. His tone was indecipherable. Lance, UFC King set me up again. Even the legendary anti-mystic equipment has counterfeits. Thales furrowed his brows. Whereas, Asda narrowed his eyes. Black Sword on the other hand, had a gloomy expression on his face. In the midst of the chilly wind, all three of them stayed silent for a while. Facing such a situation, they seemed to be at a loss for words. Asda glared at Thales and spoke in a scary tone, "Child, you are really mischievous." Thales flashed a sour smile at him. But before he could say anything, Black Sword moved again. Black Sword raised his legs and planted his feet at the edge of the cliff. He then pulled the little red sword out with his left hand. No longer having a hold on anything, Black Sword started to slowly descend along with Thales. Asda's expression suddenly changed. Conversely, Thales was so shocked that he forgot to breathe. "A surprise for you," Black Sword said flatly. "You." Asda raised his hand furiously. Planning to lift them up, he moved the air current around them. However, Black Sword did not give him the opportunity. In less than a second, Black Sword's power surged and he kicked the cliff's edge, falling backwards together with Thales. At a speed that Asda was unable to react to, he plunged down the cliff. Chapter 167 Flee. Thales finally knew how it felt like to fall from a high altitude. It felt like nothing he ever felt before. This helpless feeling of weightlessness emptied his mind in the blink of an eye and robbed his body off its autonomous control. He only felt panicked and vacant. Cold wind blew against his face. Whistle. Black Sword held Thales in his bosom with one arm. Unable to say anything, Thales' lips trembled. Amid the strong wind, even breathing was a chore. Thales' mind was blank. At that moment, that strange fluctuation surged through his entire body again, and it was as if time had slowed down. However, this time, the fluctuation did not bring him any miracle. Violent air current grazed past their sleeves. They were still falling. Beneath him, Dragon Cloud City became clearer and clearer. There was nothing he could do. His mind blank, Thales could only shut his eyes and wait for death. At this moment, Black Sword suddenly made a move. Screech. Again, the sharp sound of metal rubbing against stone rang. Thales felt his body drop, and it seemed like gravity had returned. He opened his eyes abruptly. Flames entered his vision. Shocked, Thales watched as a hand that extended from behind held the strange black sword and scraped it against the wall of the cliff, producing a trail of sparks. The speed at which they were falling began to reduce. But right after that, Thales felt a sudden shock. Abruptly feeling the weight of his body, Thales felt dizzy. It was like his body was being torn apart. Thales gagged uncontrollably. Panting, he realized that he could now breathe more smoothly. Huh! The Prince of Constellation soon realized in astonishment that they had stopped. Thales could not help but take in a mouthful of cold air. They had stopped falling, and they were hanging beside the cliff wall. Having plunged headfirst, Thales now had his feet pointing downwards. "I'm alive." Thales raised his head in disbelief and saw the situation at hand clearly. Black Sword was not holding his strange sword anymore. Instead, he was holding on tightly to a thin rope with his right hand. The other end of the rope was secured to a large nail, which was lodged into the wall of the cliff. It enabled them to hang stably midair. Black Sword gritted his teeth. His right hand was covered in blood. Cling clang. Beneath Thales, the sound of metal falling onto ground could be heard. When he snapped out of his daze, Thales realized that he was drenched in cold sweat. "This rope, you prepared it beforehand?" the Prince of Constellation asked in disbelief. Black Sword sneered softly. "I lured Asda here for the duel, so that I would have a way out." Black Sword loosened his grip, and the both of them slid down at a steady speed. Even though the rope was thin, it seemed to be extremely tough and tensile. It looked like it was specially made for such activities. Thales stared at Black Sword's blood-covered hand in amazement. It had been injured from the high-speed friction earlier. However, Black Sword did not seem to be aware of it at all, as though it was not his hand. Boom. They fell on an uneven piece of rock that protruded from the wall of the cliff. A little weak in the knees, Thales held on to the cliff wall for support. Trying hard to regulate his breathing, he stared down at Dragon Cloud City. He could see many of the roofs clearly. However, he was more worried about the situation at hand. Thales started thinking about his relationship with Black Sword. Having escaped from Asda with the help of Black Sword, Thales thought of the choices available to him. What will he do to me? Does he know who I am? Thales' breathing quickened. If Asda spoke the truth about Black Sword being the one who assassinated Crown Prince Midir 12 years ago, that means Black Sword is. Gilbert mentioned in Mindy's Hall that Prince Midir was assassinated by someone from the Shadow Shield. In Heroic Spirit Palace, Archduke Pofret said that the Shadow Shield have been yearning to take my life, before he died. Having thought of this, Thales' heart skipped a beat. Gritting his teeth, Thales stared vigilantly at Black Sword, who had his back against him. There is a huge possibility that this person. However, the moment Thales stared at him, Black Sword immediately turned. It made Thales so scared that his entire body trembled. He clenched his fists. He felt a chill running down his spine, as though he was the target of a powerful hunter. Black Sword gazed at Thales profoundly. His eyes were murderous. Thales was too scared to even breathe. He could only force a smile. Furrowing his brows, Black Sword inhaled. Realizing that the one staring at him with enmity was only a child, the coldness in Black Sword's eyes faded. Expressionless, he turned his head back. Picking up his sword, Black Sword started to equip himself. Thales' palms were drenched in sweat. Does this man have eyes on his back? How was he able to sense my gaze? Lowering his head, Thales clenched his fists tightly. Facing such a dangerous and scary gang leader after escaping from Asda, Thales felt increasingly uneasy. No, I mustn't reveal my identity. I also have to think of a way to get away safely, and go back to Heroic Spirit Palace. Thales tried his best to breathe evenly. However, things did not go as planned as a familiar voice could be heard. What took you so long? A figure emerged from behind the stone. His voice was filled with anxiety. Seeing the newcomer's face vividly under the moonlight, Thales immediately widened his eyes. Seriously? Why am I so unlucky? Upon hearing that voice, Black Sword did not even turn. His tone was flat. I got into a tiny bit of trouble. Have you secured the rope? I was done 5 minutes ago. Slide down the rope and it will lead you to Shield District. The newly arrived old man leaned to the side and pulled out a thin rope similar to the one they used earlier. Why are you covered in wounds again? Seeing Black Sword's flustered appearance, the old man furrowed his brows. I thought you were only getting a few things from Heroic Spirit Palace. The old man stopped talking all of a sudden. He saw Thales, who was standing beside Black Sword. The old man opened his mouth in shock. Blinking, Thales flashed him an awkward smile, and waved. Hello. Mr. Ramon. The back alley doctor from the Brotherhood and suspected scion of magic, Ramon was supposed to be in Heroic Spirit Palace. But, he was now holding on to the wall of a cliff in a daze. He stared at the Prince of Constellation with surprise. Thales felt his heart sank. This is really bad. Did Black Sword come here to rescue Ramon? Ramon knows my identity all too well. And, we are definitely not in good terms. As expected, Raymond's first reaction was to point at Thales. He turned to Black Sword and said in disbelief, Why did you bring this child here? Thales shrugged and maintained a calm expression. However, his mind was revolving in chaos. What should I do? If Black Sword knows that I am a Jadastar. If he really was the one, he definitely won't be still. Thales dug his fingernails into his palms. I can't gamble on his attitude. The strange doctor sighed. Holding his head, he said with a sour expression, he is like a barrel of eternal oil, bursting into flames at the slightest touch of cinder. How are we going to flee now that you've kidnapped him? You know him. Black Sword grabbed the triangular metal clip and utilized this time to test the strength of the rope. His expression did not change. Who is he? He is. At this moment. Dr. Ramon, Thales suddenly said in a joyful tone. Ramon raised his eyebrows, recalling Thales' mind-reading ability. His expression immediately turned unpleasant. However, his expression changed greatly upon hearing Thales' following words. I managed to find out about Soul Tower's background, Thales said with a smile. I was about to tell you. Hey, it turns out that Soul Tower was built during the age of feudal kings after the Battle of Survival. It was built by a wizard called Yuri Crescent. Ramon opened his eyes wide in shock. Before Black Sword could turn his head, Thales made faces at Ramon. With a threatening expression, he pointed at his head and crossed his arms in front of his chest. Ramon froze. Soul Tower is actually a pair of twin towers, and it's located in a place called Foothill Peninsula. There seems to be a very large research department there called the Convention of All Magic. Perhaps we should find time to sit down and have a good chat. Ramon widened his eyes and his hands trembled slightly. Thales shook his head firmly, hoping that the strange doctor would get what he actually meant. Of course, it's best if we keep it a secret. Soul Tower. Black Sword narrowed his eyes and turned. He is in your trade. Ramon snapped out of his stupor. He glanced at the nonchalant and brimming Thales, then at the busy Black Sword. Raymond's expression dimmed, as if was trying to recall something. Staring at Black Sword, he stuttered, this child, he is, the youngest son of one of the suzerains in Heroic Spirit Palace. He's interested in magic. These days, nobles who know about magic and don't reject it are hard to come by. Rubbing his hands, Ramon chuckled and said, I plan to rely on his resources in the long term when he grows up. Thales immediately relaxed. Having experienced Black Sword's ability to sense things, Thales did not dare to move at all. Instead, he internalized his sigh of relief. Magic, HMPH. Black Sword paid no heed to their argument, and did not ask any further questions. So, that's the reason why Asda kidnapped him. This sentence seemingly froze the already cold air. Asda, Raymond's expression totally changed. He looked around. We're in Extit's Dragon Cloud City, and you met the air mystic. We just said hello to each other. Black Sword played it down. Black Sword fastened the metal roller and pulled the rope a little. His expression was cold as he drew out the little red sword from his waist and tossed it to Ramon. Speaking of which, this weapon from Azure Ambition. I may as well let the monster eat it up. Apart from scaring him, it's completely useless. How is it possible? Clamoring to avoid the tip of the sword, Ramon held it up. His eyes were filled with bewilderment. Our Lady couldn't have gotten it wrong. It's a counterfeit. Perhaps, now that I think about it, we were too confident. Black Sword furrowed his brows. After all, we're talking about a powerful legendary anti-mystic equipment, which can be used to seal a mystic. It isn't a trifling thing that would just be kept in the mezzanine. We have no choice but to think of another solution. However, the lady mentioned in her letter that this is the only legendary anti-mystic equipment that we'll be able to find. Ramon scratched his head. The other ones are firmly in the possession of various kingdoms. Do you think that you can break into the army and snatch the Kingdom Wrath's motionless bow? Or, are you going to go to faraway Prayer City and steal Raven of Death's crossbow of time? Black Sword's expression dimmed. He shook his head. We'll talk about this another time. Right now, we urgently need to leave. Thales stared at the little red sword. No one knew that the moment Black Sword drew the little red sword out, Thales felt a burning sensation in his chest. The moment Black Sword took it out beside the cliff, he felt that strange and familiar sensation again. Thales looked at the little red sword in a daze. What's going on? According to them, this is a counterfeit of a legendary anti-mystic equipment. Black Sword raised his head abruptly. Staring at the sky above him, his expression became extremely scary. Lowering his head, Black Sword pulled Ramon as well as Thales over, and he pushed them hard towards the rope, which led downwards. Go. Raymond's face became pale. What's? Quick, go. Black Sword spoke in a hurry, and his tone was filled with worry. He's found us. Thales froze. He knew what Black Sword was talking about. Ramon trembled violently. Despite the heavy snowstorm, and our far distance, Black Sword secured the rope around Raymond's waist. Allowing no explanation, he tied him together with Thales. I've underestimated the mystic's abilities. Thales furrowed his brows. *T, I haven't completely escaped from Asda. I'll hold him off, Black Sword said coldly. But, wanting to say something, Raymond's face was filled with fear. Black Sword forced the roller into Raymond's hand, and before the pale-faced Ramon could react, he raised his leg. Take him with you, and go down first. Wait, Ramon raised his brows and stared at Thales in disbelief. However, before he could finish his sentence, Black Sword kicked him down the cliff. Damn you! Black Sword! This is despicable. Amid Raymond's indignant, frightened screams, Thales once again experienced the sensation of weightlessness as they slid downwards. Thales took a deep breath. Fortunately, it was obviously not Raymond's first time doing this. Even though he was extremely furious and he could not stop cursing, he was able to maneuver the roller with skill and slide down safely with Thales. After sliding more than 10 meters down, the sounds of clashing swords and raging air currents could be heard above them. Damn it! As they slid down, Ramon looked upwards with worry. He then lowered his head and fiercely said, Listen here, child, before you go back to Heroic Spirit Palace, you must tell me about Soul Tower, and then stay as far as possible away from me. You are practically a sewage worker, getting into some new *T every single day. Hey, without Black Sword by their side, Thales felt more at ease. Holding on to the rope, he protested in dissatisfaction. Is this how you talk to your lifesaver? Also, how did you manage to get out of the palace? Lifesaver, Raymond's expression changed. Spare me, you're just a sly little brat who's full of lies. Recalling something, Ramon said in exasperation, you even lied to me about your ability to read minds. Thales' expression froze. How did you find out? I'm not an idiot. The strange doctor's face was filled with contempt. I guessed it the day you asked me about magic. They were getting closer to the city. They seemed to be in a comparably run-down district within Dragon Cloud City. Even though Thales could only see roofs in the streets, he noticed how messy as well as dilapidated the district was. They finally landed safely behind a small house on the uneven stone ground exclusive to Dragon Cloud City. Having the ground beneath his feet once again, Thales felt a surge of relief. Thales detached himself from the rope. His thoughts were a mess. Nonetheless, he nonchalantly said, You know, Black Sword won't be able to block him, it's best if we flee on our own first. Don't worry about Black Sword. That man definitely won't die. Ramon removed the rope from his body and nodded. However, I agree to what you've just said. Having come to a consensus, both of them started to run without looking back. They ran across the empty streets. Panting, Thales gritted his teeth. If we run into patrol guards, I'll at least be able to send news to Putre and the rest. However, before they could go far, a huge explosion sounded behind them. Boom! There was a sudden flurry of snowflakes behind them. Thales and Ramon trembled. They took a look at each other and ran down the street at an increasing speed. They dared not look back. They ran for 3 minutes straight, waking up plenty of the residents in the process. Behind them, the window of one of the houses was opened. Yawning, a man looked out with curiosity. In a house to their left, a dog was roused from its sleep. It barked furiously and balefully at them. A woman from a house in front of them swore and shouted at them. Someone from a double-story house to their left emptied a basin of water in anger. To their right, someone threw a beer bottle out of a shop. Both of them paid no heed to all of it. Panting, they continued running. Having crossed plenty of alleys in the past, Thales had no problem running through the messy streets. However, as a child, his physical capacity was limited. On the other hand, even though Ramon was an adult, he did not seem like he exercised much. He already started panting after running for a very short distance. Coupled with the poor visibility of dawn, they slowed down inevitably. Finally, Thales heard someone urgently barking orders in front of them. "What's going on with the footsteps in front of us? Come with me. Unit 3 and Unit 4, all of you patrol the streets on the left. Assemble every 5 minutes, and each time, send a messenger to report back. Unit 6 and Unit 9, go and investigate the explosion immediately. It should be right below the cliff of the sky. If any team members, soldiers or residents go missing. If you see anyone suspicious, don't let them go, but make reporting back safely a priority. Our higher-ups have ordered that the moment you encounter inexplicable things or people, launch a signal arrow immediately." These were their original words. There seemed to be quite a lot of people. A rush of hope appeared in Thales' heart. Alternatively, Raymond's face became pale. He seemed a little anxious. "It's okay," Thales consoled him. "I just need to reveal my identity." However, at this moment, 2 hands suddenly extended from the alley beside them and dragged the both of them in. Chapter 168 The Tragic End of Weaklings. The 2 hands that stretched out from the dark alley cupped around their mouths with a strength so great it was impossible to resist it. With flashes of the firelight, the patrol unit consisting of at least a dozen men hurried past the street. The shouts sounded and faded repeatedly. Thales and Ramon struggled as if their lives depended on it, but with few light taps on their necks, the stranger disabled their strength to even open their mouths. Ramon widened his eyes and eventually discerned the man before them under the dim moonlight, Black Sword, who had been covering their escape. The pale-faced man had his hands cupped over their mouths, pressing them against the wall of the alleyway until the patrols left. Thales sighed sadly in his heart. "Quick," Black Sword released them and said weakly, "Asda is right behind us." A feeling of anxiety grew within Thales. Before they replied, Black Sword dragged the 2 of them into another alleyway. "I lured at least 3 patrol units here. I'm not sure how long they can stall him, but that should probably alert the whole city," Black Sword said, tracing the wall with his hands, panting as he led the way. "We take the alley. I suspect Asda is looking for us from the sky." A thought appeared in Thales' mind. "No." The 2 men from the Brotherhood turned around. Thales lifted his chin and looked at Black Sword and Ramon, scowling. "He doesn't have to search for us from the sky." "What?" Black Sword kept walking. He frowned. Thales recalled what Asda had told him in the chess room at Red Street Market, that the air mystic could sense the airflow along a whole street. "Such as our breaths," Thales said, gnashing his teeth. "He can track us by detecting our breathing." As he spoke, Black Sword suddenly stopped moving while he was leading the way in front. Thales and Ramon also grew tense. In that instant, Thales realized that there was no noise coming from the place they left behind, where Asda and the patrols had supposedly encountered one another. "What's going on?" "Not just your breath," a familiar, pleasant voice that sent a shiver down Thales' spine sounded from the path ahead. "The air flowing in your bodies is like a road sign, a blinding light in the dark." Ramon was shaking. He took a step back. Black Sword stooped down solemnly. He got into position, preparing to strike at any moment. Thales sighed as he watched the alleyway ahead, as the Sakern walked slowly out of the corner like a phantom. "You are an insubordinate child." Ignoring Black Sword and Ramon, Asda glared at Thales. The coldness in his eyes was chilling. "I have to admit, your little scheme with the help of the stupid roach did cause me some trouble." With a blanched look, Ramon took a step back, glancing around. Black Sword remained in front of them with a hand on the strange sword at his waist. "Because you were not being friendly." Thales gave a long sigh and clenched his fists. "This is a housing area. If I scream now, will it help? Or will I get some curious, innocent residents into trouble?" "Oh, no, I was as friendly as I could be." Asda shook his head calmly. "But you forced my hand. I have to employ some harsh tactics." Thales narrowed his eyes. He noticed that there was something odd about what the air mystic just said. As expected, Asda jerked with his finger. A small, sobbing silhouette drifted from behind him. Thales' pupils shrank. No. It was a scruffy, bespectacled girl about 8 or 9 years old. Under Asda's control, she hung in the midair, occasionally letting out a wheeze of fear. "Bloody hell." Thales gaped at the girl in disbelief. With her glasses were tilted to one side, she could only watch in panic and fear as she levitated in the air. When she caught the sight of Thales, however, she seemed to have found someone who could save her. It's him, it's that boy. The girl stretched her tiny arms out to Thales, revealing some bruises on them. Helpless tears trickled out of her eyes, and she wailed. Hearing her cry, Thales sucked in a deep breath. With a heavy heart, he looked up at the shivering, weeping girl, little rascal. Thales clenched his fists. It was her, Saroma Walton, little rascal. Asda said softly, come back to me, stop being so difficult. Unless, Asda said soft and wriggled his finger. You want to watch this little servant to die? Little rascal made a 180-degree rotation in the air and was upside down. Thales held his breath. At that very moment, little rascal was petrified into silence. She merely floated in the air, quivering, weeping quietly with tremendous dread. Black Sword scowled. Thales clenched his teeth. I know you will not willingly leave with me. As though knowing what was on his mind, Asda chuckled. So, I have taken precautions. Little rascal pivoted in the air. The girl was already paralyzed by fear and could not even say a word, while her tears flew everywhere. This is a matter between you and me. Thales gnashed his teeth, conflicted. It has nothing to do with her. He stared at little rascal's terrified eyes behind her glasses. He remembered the scene when little rascal covered her mouth in fear and stumbled backwards as she watched Alex convulse on the floor. He remembered little rascal's hand held tightly by King Nuven while he placed a black ring on her palm. He remembered little rascal's trembling hand when he pulled the girl away from the Hall of Heroes. She knew nothing. She was completely unprepared and was forced to face all this. Of course, Asda said slowly, smiling. I noticed that back in Red Street Market, you cared for that friend of yours deeply. Now let us see if you care about this friend just as much. A distant memory surfaced in his mind. Quide lifted Korea up with a manic grin, grabbed a red-hot silver coin and pressed it onto the child beggar's cheek while laughing hysterically. Korea, her struggle, the look on her face, her cries. Thales inhaled feebly, staring at little rascal. If I go with you, will you release her? Thales said weakly. No. The smile faded from Asda's face. He said with a blank expression, I will keep her with me. Her fate is dependent on your actions. Thales' breathing stilled. Your past actions have disappointed me, the air mystic said coldly, this is punishment for your reluctance to cooperate. Do not forget how serious I can be just because I was friendly to you. Mystics are not to be toyed with, do not displease powerful beings like us. Asda gazed at him and said meaningfully, unless you become, as strong as we are. Do you understand? Thales shuddered from head to toe. Seeing the helpless little rascal, he recalled that day. That day when Korea, with a high fever and a face full of red blotches, smiled at Thales, who was trapped in the sixth house, with teary eyes. I'm not afraid, because, Thales will always find a way. When the silver coin was pressed against Korea's cheek, the sizzling sound of grilled flesh seemed to echo in his ears again. Thales shut his eyes and tightened his fists. A wave of sorrow washed over him. Thales will always find a way. I'll always find a way. Asda. Thales squeezed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed a hand on his trembling chest. You bastard. Do not be angry. Taking hostages, Asda snorted. I learned it from your friend in the Brotherhood. Suddenly, Thales felt a pressure on his left shoulder. That girl. Black Sword heaved a sigh, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Is she someone important to you? Thales remained quiet. Asda frowned slightly. Thales looked up. Mr. Black Sword, he shook his head with a determined gaze. Please press your sword against my neck. Thales' words made Asda crease his brow. Let's bet whose life is more important to him, mine or hers. Oh, child, Asda sighed in pity, I'll let you guess what kind of punishment you deserve for saying that. Silence ensued. The air held only little rascal sobs. Until the ordinary man broke the silence. Black Sword smiled and patted on Thales' shoulder. Hey, listen to me. Black Sword turned around and glared at Asda. Don't listen to that guy's bullshit. Thales looked up, puzzled. Powerful beings. Black Sword pulled out his weapon, his voice was full of disdain. This arrogant, undying monster calls himself a powerful being. Asda's expression changed. He might seem powerful, Black Sword said coolly with a smile, as though the person before him was just a second-rate opponent. But don't forget that, these people have been hiding and seeking shelter in this wild, wide world, fearing for their own lives for the past 600 years, running from countless battles. Thales wrinkled his brow. Asda's expression darkened. Black Sword did not press his sword against Thales' neck, like the boy suggested. He took a step forward while glaring at Asda, eyes gleaming with bloodlust. Black Sword parted his feet and bent his knees, a cold glint sparked in his eyes. The weaklings who should be afraid, are you and your people, the calamities. Don't mix that up. Thales said nothing. A blue light flashed in Asda's eyes. Black Sword raised his sword and pointed it at Asda. We have yet settled the score between us before you found this boy, monster. The air mystic stopped smiling. Want to take my life? Black Sword challenged. Come and get it. You pathetic weakling. Asda narrowed his eyes which glimmered with a blue light. Little rascal slowly descended onto the ground. Don't misunderstand, child, Asda said calmly. You won't escape your punishment, after I eliminate this cockroach. The two stared at each other intensely, as if this was the final battle between them. Thales held his breath. He thought swiftly. He had to have different approaches to handle the different results of their battle. Although Thales did not think Black Sword would win. After all, the legendary anti-mystic equipment was. At that moment. Ah! Raymond's scream came from behind. Thales whipped his head around, and spotted Ramon a dozen feet away with his back towards them, as if he was trying to flee quietly. But after a few steps, he turned back stiffly and gaped at them. The strange doctor had an extreme look of panic on his face. His eyes were filled with shock and dread, as though he had just seen something terrifying. Black Sword's expression changed and he started moving. Ignoring the air mystic, he dashed without hesitation towards Ramon, who seemed to be in great trouble. Thales narrowed his eyes in confusion. What's going on? His question was answered soon enough. A loud bang came the next second. Boom. Thales' eyes widened as he saw Ramon explode before his eyes. The strange doctor, who was alive and kicking a moment ago, burst into smithereens in torrents of blood. Thales was stupefied. This is... The force from the explosion stirred up an airwave, sending the walls on both sides of the alley flying. No. Black Sword bellowed as he ran past Thales, slicing a huge rock that flew towards him into half and dashing towards the spot where Ramon had blown up. Thales lifted his arms with difficulty, shielding himself from the debris that showered over him. Black Sword darted into the looming cloud of dust. The sounds of an intense fight came from within, then it was followed by a shocking, enraged roar from Black Sword. Seconds passed, and Black Sword's shout stopped abruptly. Thales gawked at what had just unfolded before him. He did not even notice that Asda had already walked to his side. Step back, the air mystic said to him coldly. Thales recovered from the shock. He turned around and rushed towards Little Rascal, who was shivering on the ground. It's all right now. Thales tried to comfort her, but he himself was overwhelmed with fear. He stared at the cloud of dust. Little Rascal held on tightly to Thales' arm, gnashing her teeth and sobbing. A second later, a slender silhouette appeared from within the dust, holding a sword in her hand. Thales was shocked. It was an odd sword coated in black paint. Oh, look at what happened to the person who called us weaklings. The silhouette happily tossed the weapon away. Clunk. The strange, black-colored sword fell onto the ground. This is the tragic end he met with, said the stranger as she chuckled. No way. Thales gaped at the strange sword on the ground. Black Sword, he was just. The strange sword was still trembling non-stop, as if it was calling out to its master, who was gone from it. The approaching figure drew closer until she completely left the area of the dust cloud. Thales' expression changed. He gawked at the unwelcome intruder in horror. It was a delicate-looking girl who wore a lovely smile on her face. Thales felt his stomach churn. The approaching person stirred up his most hated memories. I was very curious what on earth made our air mystic evolve. The girl giggled with her head tilted to one side, eyeing them with a mischievous grin. Thanks to you, I managed to find you very quickly. Wow, I didn't expect to meet you. The young girl averted her gaze to Thales. The surging emotions in her eyes heightened. What a surprise. Thales sighed to himself. With a cold expression, Asda took a step forward and stood in front of Thales to block him from view. The air mystic spoke to the maiden flatly without a change in his expression. It has been a while, my dear partner. Giza. Chapter 169 Air and Blood. Your Majesty, those constellations. On the rooftop balcony of Heroic Spirit Palace, the Star Killer stood beside King Nuven, holding his oddly shaped blade. They request to leave to find their prince themselves. King Nuven squinted, overlooking the castle town beneath him, Walton family's Dragon Cloud City. The king slowly exhaled a puff of air. Let them go. King Nuven's voice sounded rather weary. Perhaps they can even find my granddaughter along the way. Compared to the situation at hand, perhaps the Walton family matter was not as important. King Nuven heaved a heavy sigh. Nicholas nodded, turned around and passed down the order. After a moment, the Star Killer was back at the king's side. This time, however, he wore a grim expression. The patrol units just reported back. We have determined the exact location of the calamity. King Nuven's face darkened. He turned to face Nicholas. His eyes shone with shrewdness and resolution. The 2 units in Shield District have not responded to the calls for the past 30 minutes. Their bodies were found not long afterwards, in pieces, the commander of White Blade Guards said slowly. Shield District. King Nuven hesitated for a second. Good, the old king said flatly, peering at the city beneath him. Crushing humans into pieces, what else should I know about the calamity? There was a silence, until an aged, kind voice rose. Yes, your majesty. Standing behind the king was the director of the secret room, Red Witch Calcian. She bowed respectfully. Kindly evacuate the residents in Shield District and the neighboring areas. If possible, I recommend leading them out of the city. Nicholas sucked in a deep breath. Is it a bit too much? King Nuvan frowned. Just because of one calamity, I have to empty half the city. Believe me, your majesty, Kalshan began, her voice soft and gentle. Sacrificing half a city is better than the whole city. Ellipsis. Thales held little rascal tightly, keeping the violently shaking girl from slipping on the ground. What was that? Who are they? Little rascal's tears had long dried. The tear tracks were the marks of the misfortune she had experienced earlier. No matter what they are, I'm here for you, Thales said softly. Everything will be all right. His gaze fixed on the two individuals before him, especially the girl who stuck her head out to stare past Asda and smiled brightly at him. Giza Streelman's eyes were filled with tenderness and love. Child, I'd told you, we would meet again. Thales only felt more goosebumps on his skin. The explosion that killed Ramon blasted the walls on both sides, turning an alleyway into a round vacant lot, affecting many of the people who lived nearby. A commotion of such a large scale was impossible to cover. Oh God, my leg is trapped. What happened? Help, somebody, help me. Get more people to help. What about the disciplinary officer? Where's the disciplinary officer? The house has collapsed. There would occasionally be injured citizens wailing in the wreckage around them. More Northlanders were shocked awake from their sleep. They walked out of their houses, and after their initial shock and fear, they went to help the injured. There were about 100 of them. Who are you? A few Northlander men noticed the two confronting mystics and came towards them, puzzled. What happened just now? Hey, young lady, did you see the explosion earlier? Thales saw a short, stout, elderly man walk towards them with a solemn expression and a torch in his hand. He took a dubious glance at Asda, then asked Giza, who wore a cryptic expression, are you in trouble? Thales' heart sank. Nevertheless, Giza and Asda stood still, unmoved by the noise and clamor of their surroundings. It was as if they were the only two people in the world. I am happy to see that you have recovered, Giza, Asda whispered. I heard about you from that child, and your attitude towards him. Wonderful. Giza put on her signature gentle smile, snorted, and said, I don't have to repeat it. Asda wore a faintly chilly expression. There might be a misunderstanding between you two. Thales swallowed. He turned around, hoping for a chance to sneak away. Instead, he saw more and more people approaching them. Uh-oh, Thales' chest tightened. The short, muscular man gestured impatiently to the injured residents lying around. Hey, you two, I don't know if you're fighting or pulling a Dark Knight Temple drama, the people need help right now. You had better not just stand there. His utterance was interrupted by the stomping of heavy footsteps in the distance. Teams of patrollers with torches held high came to this place, spread out their formation, drew close, and watched all the people on the street with wary expressions on their faces. Thales felt a jolt. The patrols of Dragon Cloud City, but, he peeked at the two mystics facing each other quietly. This is such a bad time to show up. Misunderstanding. Giza ignored the sudden appearance of the patrol team. She shifted her profound gaze back to Asda. Don't worry, the misunderstanding between that child and I will be resolved. The blood mystic licked her lips. Very soon. Thales spotted an unknown object lying beside her feet that looked like Raymond's or Black Sword's broken limb. The sight of it made his hair stand on end. Asda frowned. He understood what Giza meant right away. Everyone, quiet, line up along the roadside. A hoarse voice came from the patrol team. In the name of the king, obey the disciplinary officer's instructions and then leave in one line. With mixed emotions, the residents who were helping the injured and curious onlookers directed their gazes to the patrol team. Do as I say. A disciplinary officer walked out from the group of soldiers. I will repeat one more time. Hey, officer or whatever. The short, sturdy man who had interrupted the mystics' conversation pounded on his chest. He turned to the disciplinary officer and said, lots of people are injured here and need help. Do you think the lives of Shield District residents aren't important? Following his protest, the residents began to voice their disapproval at the patrolmen together. You'll get all the help you need, but Shield District must be evacuated now. You, the disciplinary officer uttered impatiently, but he paused all of a sudden and squinted. Wait, I recognize you. You're, Big Leather Belt, of the Glacial Sentries, aren't you? The short, brawny man nodded slightly with a stern face. We need help. The disciplinary officer's attitude was significantly nicer. He turned to his subordinates and waved. All right, for your sake, go assist the people first, get the injured out of there, then evacuate immediately. The residents were gradually appeased. The disciplinary officer turned around and frowned at Big Leather Belt. Where's Gleeward? These people only listened to him. He was summoned away by some officers, said it was an order from the king. I don't know if it was true. Big Leather Belt glanced at the two mystics in their confrontation. Why do we have to evacuate? Not sure. It was the king's orders. The disciplinary officer shook his head. We received an urgent dispatch to rush here. Have you seen any suspicious individuals? Suspicious individuals? This is Shield District. Strangers are almost. Big Leather Belt paused, and turned to the two mystics with an astonished look on his face. There they are. In the meantime, on Thales' side, the two mystics were still talking to each other as though what was happening in their surroundings did not matter. This child, do you know who he is? The air mystic said, do you know what he means to us? Of course, I know very well who he is, Giza said, laughing. There was a hint of hostility in her voice. Step aside, Asda. Unmoved, Asda's expression turned grim. I do not like to be told what to do, Giza. Shit, Thales paled. You two, and the two children at the back. The disciplinary officer, followed by several soldiers, approached the mystics, eyeing their thin clothing with a doubtful expression. Where did you come from? What's going on here? Giza turned to look at the vigilant soldiers with a bright smile. You, or me? It's going to draw attention to us. Asda shook his head. Maybe we should be discreet. No, Thales observed every move Giza and Asda made. His heart froze. Good, then I'll do it. Gia sighed. I need to collect some materials anyway. Asda frowned slightly. Thales felt a chill. This is bad. Run. Thales drew in his breath and started shouting at the people who came near them. Get out of here, everyone, quick, get the hell out. Report to Heroic Spirit Palace immediately. In bewilderment, the disciplinary officer and Big Leather Belt watched the little boy tug at a quivering little girl, yelling at them. It's dangerous here. Nevertheless, a tender, childish voice obviously could not resolve the Northlanders' confusion and curiosity. What happened, kid? The short and sturdy, Big Leather Belt, approached Thales, shooting a vigilant glare at the blank-faced Asda. Did this guy do something you? Thales stumbled backwards, shaking his head. No. You, young lady, a soldier grasped Giza's arm rudely. Don't just stand here, go to the side of the street. As soon as he was in contact with her, his body trembled, he fell on the ground, and his arm convulsed uncontrollably. Giza's chuckle rang in his ears. Bloody hell, my hand. What did you do? The other soldiers turned to look at the soldier who fell and they broke into laughter. You can't even catch a girl, Jason. You should retire. Asda seemed unaffected. He gazed at the poor soldier who had touched Giza and collapsed on the ground, red-faced. His fate was sealed. Assaulting the patrols. Good, capture them. The disciplinary officer narrowed his eyes, paused, and said resolutely, and report this to the higher-ups. Thales sighed. He knew it was too late. The soldiers from the patrol units giggled. They had the two mystics surrounded. Giza turned to face them, a warm smile appearing on her face. In that very second, Thales forced Little Rascal to kneel and pressed her against his chest, blocking her view. Don't look, Thales said softly with cold eyes. Little Rascal shuddered, but she still obediently buried her face in his chest. Don't listen. When the first shriek rang out, Little Rascal, who was still very much confused and dazed, was forced by Thales to cover her ears. Stay put, no matter what happens, I am with you. At that moment, even Thales shut his eyes. His chin rested on Little Rascal's head. He knew what would happen next. These people, on the other hand, had no idea what they were up against. It was too cruel. What's with this girl? I can't catch her. The soldiers exclaimed in astonishment. Ah, something's wrong with this girl. It burns. Thales heard the sound of human limbs falling onto the ground. Ah, my hand, my hand. A few men let out blood-curdling screams. Jason, oh God, he's melting, his blood. Under the panicked warnings of the man called Big Leather Belt, the patrol team noticed what was off. My God, no, what are you? Under the agitated commands from the disciplinary officer, the soldiers drew their weapons out of their scabbards. UWH-RE, I don't care what demonic trick you're using, FC King, stop it at once. Or else I swear to God, I swear I'll kill you. The disciplinary officer bellowed in rage. However, the wretched wails multiplied. My back, there's something in my back, it's moving. Robbie, hang in there, I'm hacking this thing off now. Boss, kill her quick. An explosive sound rang out. Bang, asterisk. Thales, who held Little Rascal tightly, shuddered violently. The sound of flesh being blasted into smithereens rose into the air again. It caused the onlooking citizens to cry out, their shouts filled with fear and surprise. No, there was a gut-wrenching cry. The corpse, pieces of it are moving. Is that Sithi's hand? My God. Those screams were accompanied by Giza's chuckles. What are you waiting for? Kill her now, came the manic screech of the disciplinary officer. The sound of blades piercing human flesh echoed, then came the sound of a human head hitting the ground, followed by Giza's demure yet unending laughs. I am impossible, her head, why is it still moving? Help, boss, the thing that comes out of her body, monster. She's a monster. My God, stop going near that thing. Step back, everyone, Big Leather Belt shouted hysterically. Thales clenched his teeth, trying not to imagine what was going on in his surroundings. As she cowered in his arms, Little Rascal shivered despite being unable to see or hear anything. Thales could not help but recall the nightmarish scenes he witnessed in the birch tree forest in the northern territory of Constellation. Retreat, everyone, retreat. The disciplinary officer's voice began to shake. Fear had taken control of his mind and dominated his courage. It was not just the patrol units whom were affected. When the onlookers realized that what they were facing was some fearsome, unknown entity, and that the patrols could not keep the situation under control, panic erupted among them. They began to flee in terror, but it was too late. The sound of cracking concrete and stones echoed. Watch the ground. What's coming out of the ground? Ah. Nina, never mind me. Take our son and leave, quick. Are these tree roots? I can't chop them off. No, father, no. Don't come near me, arg. The countless cries of men and women traveled around. Boss, what do we do? These things are everywhere. The voice of the disciplinary officer was drowned out by the soldiers' frantic wails. Thales squeezed his eyes shut and bit his lower lip. His arms around little rascal trembled uncontrollably. The footsteps scattered and gradually faded, replaced by shrieks, sounds of people being dragged across the floor, the clanging of fallen blades and swords, and the howls of despair. Wait, what about the signal arrows? Quick, fire them, inform the higher-ups. Big Leather Belt's groan was accompanied by the sound of him being dragged on the ground. The crossbows creaked as the arrows were shot. What followed, however, was a string of clinks and clunks from the sky. The arrows can't be fired. It's as if something is blocking them in the air. A soldier cried in panic. Thales ground his teeth. At the next moment, a clear, cold voice of a man huffed. Humph. Thales felt the air around him move. Ka-chok, asterisk. About a dozen cracks rang out. Some were nearby, some from a distance. The people's bones had been crushed in that instant. Then, the sounds all faded at once. The silence lasted about 10 seconds. Occasionally, there was the sound of something meaty being hauled on the ground, accompanied by some bone-chilling crunches, the kind of sound a beast made when gnawing on its prey. Thales tried to stop himself from shaking. Finally, everything around them returned to silence. You might be saying that you don't want to, but in the end, you still stuck your nose in this. The blood mystic's lackadaisical, feminine voice traveled into the air. How boring. But strangely, Giza's voice came from under the ground. Asda's faint harumph was the reply she got. Thales sucked in a breath before he slowly opened his eyes. Contrary to his expectations, everything around him was incredibly clean. There was no blood, no corpses, no disgusting torn limbs. Of course, there was also not a single living person. There were only weapons scattered all over the floor, shoes that fell off feet while their owners were fleeing, collapsed roofs and walls, and shattered floors. It was as if during that instant just now, everyone had managed to escape. Thales panted softly. He turned his head around, then his stomach churned. Right before his eyes, Giza's body slowly picked her still smiling head from the ground, then gently placed it on her neck before she slowly positioned it properly. The blood mystic touched the spot joining her neck and shoulder. Her bloody wound instantly disappeared without a trace. As good as new. Giza noticed his gaze and gave him a charming smile. Thales gritted his teeth. Only at that moment did Thales dare let go of Little Rascal so that the latter could open her eyes. Little Rascal stared at the bizarrely clean street around her and shuddered. Asda shook his head and said, I might have locked down all signal arrows and all sound transmissions, but with so many people missing, they'll notice what is going on here sooner or later. The blood mystic smiled and asked, Are you afraid? Asda did not speak. He turned around indifferently and walked towards Thales. Thales did not even dare breathe loudly. In his mind he was furiously thinking about how to escape. No, judging by the looks of it, he should be thinking about the possibilities of protecting his life. Wait, Giza said gently. Asda stopped in his tracks and his expression turned cold. The blood mystic raised her gaze and looked at Thales. Let that boy stay and we will still be good friends. How does that sound? A violent shudder wrecked Thales' entire body. The air mystic remained silent for an instant. Asda turned towards Giza and said slowly, the Soul Slayer Pike and Severing Soul's Blade are in the city. Even if you fight with a corporeal form, you still would not be able to withstand the Soul Slayer Pike's might. It would be best for us to flee as soon as possible. Oh, the blood mystic slowly shook her head. Then Giza slowly enunciated her words unhurriedly. You intentionally lured the patrol here so that you can use this reason to force me away and protect that dear, treasured boy of yours. You wound me, partner. When he heard this, Asda sighed. Did you forget our original intentions when we cooperated with each other, Giza? For some unknown reason, Thales felt that the air mystic's voice was filled with grief at that moment. Regardless of whether it was for my plan, Frulin's ideals, or your persistence, did the three of us not work together so that the mystics could one day be free of those shackles? The blood mystic let out a light snort. She lifted her head and looked at the moon, heading west in the sky, and said with a sneer, the incident 12 years ago has long since proven how childish and ridiculous your thoughts are, be it yours or Frulin's. Thales shuddered. 12 years ago, why is it 12 years ago again? Could it be that the mystics also took part in the bloody year? Thales could not help but recall the words Black Sword said to Asda when genocide broke out in Renaissance Palace. Also, Thales could not help but hold Little Rascal tightly again. Blood Bottle Gang was the result of the cooperation between the Air and Blood Mystics, but based on their conversation, it seems like there was a third person. Who is Fruland? Asda sucked in a deep breath. Very well, then we can part ways from here. After all, we went our own ways during the previous battle, this is your way. The results in the past were also unable to persuade you. The Air Mystic looked dejected. But what does that have to do with the boy? Asda raised his head and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. You must have a reason that makes you so bent on killing him. This time, Giza readily answered him. Of course, it's his blood, I made him a promise a long time ago. A bloodline that you must kill. Asda averted his gaze and cast Thales a glance. Did you know his mother? Thales' grip over Little Rascal's hand suddenly tightened. However, this time, Giza only put on a good-natured smile. Why don't you take a guess? The reason won't persuade me, Asda answered coldly. The Blood Mystic sighed slowly. All right, it's also because I don't want him to suffer all kinds of torment like we have. Thales' face turned pale. Suffer all kinds of torment. This reason still won't be able to persuade me, Asda repeated firmly, his face turned darker. Don't worry, I just want his life. Giza smiled and shook her head. Bang, asterisk. In the next instant, 6 blood-red tree roots with sharp thorns suddenly shot out of the ground around Thales and went straight towards him from all directions. This is bad, Thales was shocked. He simply could not react fast enough to this. Dong, asterisk. Those 6 roots were forcibly halted several inches away from Thales, blocked off by an invisible barrier. Asda raised the ball of light in his left hand and glared at the Blood Mystic while a blue light shone in his eyes. Don't, Giza, he said in a low tone. Thales panted, still yet to recover from his shock. He stared at the sharp, terrifying thorns in front of him. He made a panicked giggle. Those roots moved about as if they possessed lives. They shrank back before they shot forward again. Ah, this time, Little Rascal let out a shriek as she reacted to the situation. Asda snapped his fingers lightly. Bang, asterisk. Several powerful streams of air swept out in torrents around Thales and forcefully cut off the roots. Really, Giza, with a steely expression, the Air Mystic said coldly, we suffered great losses during the Battle of Eradication. Don't destroy everything after we've finally reached this state. The sliced roots shuddered, and sharp thorns grew on them again before they shrank back to the Blood Mystic's side. At that moment, Giza suddenly scoffed and said, HMPH, how hilarious. How dare you mention the Battle of Eradication? You speak as if you feel proud because of it. When Asda heard her words, a light crease appeared between his eyebrows. We are one, the Air Mystic said in a serious manner, dividing ourselves into factions will just injure us, and it is not beneficial to us as a whole. 1. Giza let out a snort and her voice turned cold. 1. The Blood Mystic walked forward slowly. The roots by her side followed her unhurriedly. Her eyes looked as if there were flames dancing in them. When we were bathed in blood and fighting for the future of mystics, where were you cowards? When we were fighting against the obscurists to the point that we could not tell friend from foe, where were you deserters? When we were set up by the 2 empresses to the point that we were driven to a corner, where were you pests? L. Brian, Lebla, B. Eric, when we fell one by one, where you so-called moderators? 1. Ba. Thales listened to Giza's words, stunned, but mentally noted down all the names, titles, and nouns used. He might use them in the future. Even though he was up against most possibly the most dangerous enemy in his life. Asda's expression turned cold. Don't stick your labels on us. The Air Mystic's words were cold and aloof. We are not known as moderators. Giza's smile became even brighter. Of course, that was the title Lebla designated to your faction. Before that, B called the lot of you Taurus lapdogs. Asda's expression became even more sullen. Are you saying that there are no grounds for negotiation? Asda sucked in a deep breath. No matter what, we are partners. Giza nodded, smiled sweetly, and said, that's right. You just have to work with me, isn't that so? Asda sighed and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was only a coldness in his eyes. The Air Mystic snorted coldly. I've had enough of all of you. B. That person, that madman who led all of you to become unreasonable, wild dogs, only knew how to bark rabidly, and wouldn't listen to reason. The 2 of them fell silent for a moment, but Thales felt that this was more akin to the calm before a storm. As expected, after a moment, a frightening, blood-red light shone in Giza's eyes. B taught us to accept ourselves and be free from our shackles. And you domestic dog from the magic tower, Taurus, yes man, you feel uncomfortable without a collar around your neck, Asda did not back down. I just knew that the witches from the 3rd ring wouldn't be able to bring up any good students. And then, he let out a cold harumph. You, BTCH. Giza did not speak. The beautiful maiden remained silent for 3 seconds. However, 3 seconds later, the words she said caused Asda's face to change color from the agitation. The blood mystic slowly said, "What exactly is air? Is it an entity that moves, fills, and exists in everything? Or is it something that remains in the same shape, lingers around, and is as light as emptiness itself?" Giza continued, unbothered, "What does air symbolize? What would disappearing air bring? Is air pure or is it mixed with all matter of life? Is air eternal or will it change constantly? Are you air itself, or is air a part of you?" For the first time in his life, Thales noticed to his horror that Asda Sakern's face had begun to distort. What is air? A thought appeared in Thales' mind, and then he recalled the words Asda told him before while Thales himself was stunned. The first declaration among mystics, they would not delve deep into each other's origins. He stared at Giza in disbelief. "No way, she's..." The blue light in the air mystic's eyes grew stronger. The blood mystic's words caused Thales' skin to crawl. "What now? Could it be that you remember the 3 great declarations Taurus gave all of you more than you remember your own name, little puppy Asda?" The next moment, before Asda could react, Giza opened her mouth as if she was a beast about to roar and slowly lifted her head. During that instant, Thales felt something surge out of her body. Within his field of vision, the red light from Giza became even brighter. A brilliant, thin red thread rose on Giza's neck and gradually filled her entire face. The blood-red line swiftly divided itself into several branches before they slowly thickened, until they covered Giza's face like blood vessels with blood flowing in them. And those blood vessels looked as if they possessed life. They began changing slowly, moving and shivering on Giza's face. As if they were breathing. Asda's expression changed. He moved to Thales, sighed and cast the Prince of Constellation a glance with a frown. "What?" Thales said, feeling awkward, but right when he said that word, he was interrupted. "Don't speak," Asda said coldly. "Later, when I tell you to run, run. Don't turn your head back, don't stop." Thales stared at Asda in shock and could only nod his head helplessly. Judging by his tone of voice, even Asda does not have the confidence to protect himself. Little rascal pressed herself firmly into Thales' bosom while she quivered. With blood vessels all over her face, Giza sucked in a deep breath. As if she had just woken up from a beautiful dream, she grinned, and there was madness contained in her eyes. Her originally gentle and charming smile turned into the most gorgeous, terrifying and enraged smile. "Oh my," the blood mystic looked as if she had opened the gate controlling her emotions and tilted her head to laugh loudly without inhibition. The feeling of reunion after having spent so much time apart is really good. Asda stared at her grimly. "You're taking a risk by increasing your power in this place and at this time. What now? Lack the courage to boost your power?" The blood mystic gave them another gorgeous smile. "Of course you do. After all, you're a coward. Little puppy Asda, why don't we play a game?" Asda frowned deeper. The blood mystic pointed at Thales, then raised her arms before she laughed maniacally and shouted, "I will raise my power with every minute I don't manage to kill him. And there will be no limits to its increase." Chapter 170 The Desperate Dash. When Giza raised her arms, Thales felt a tremor from below ground. Rumble, asterisk. In the next second, the blood mystic rose from the ground. No, it should be gigantic blood tentacles that were as tall as 2 people broke through the ground, rose from it and forcibly lifted Giza up. She was then raised a good 7 to 8 stories high. Splat, asterisk. Immediately following that was the sound of flesh rupturing as the gigantic tentacles exploded into numerous smaller ones. They spread across a terrifyingly large area and in every direction. Each tentacle had a life of its own as they weaved forward. A few seconds later, the blood tentacles trembled collectively. Their presence was overwhelmingly pervasive as they snaked rapidly in Thales' direction. There was more than 100 of them. Tentacles covered almost his entire view, even the moon was hidden away. Thales' face paled as he watched the scene unfold before him. In a daze, little rascal just clung to him as she had been scared silly a long time ago. Asda opened his mouth wide and yelled furiously. "Run!" With a quiver, Thales pulled little rascal up, turned around and started running. He gritted his teeth, then charged ahead without a care for anything else, without turning his head, and without changing his direction, just like Asda had told him to. Giza's delighted, maniacal laughter echoed from behind him. Thales had just covered a short distance when he heard a loud boom come from behind him. An airstream surged towards him wildly and uncontrollably. Then another loud bang. Boom, asterisk. Another airstream swept up endless dirt, stones, and snow in another direction and carried them all away. Thales' heart jumped. This is bad, the air wall is getting smashed. Boom, 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 asterisk. The thunderous bangs behind him sounded one after another. The airflow raged more urgently and grew more chaotic. Apparently, Asda's air wall was being penetrated again and again. As it happened, Thales felt a heavy weight in his hand. Little rascal had slipped and fell onto the ground. Thales felt a chill in his heart. Before he could react to the situation, the slightly slower duo felt darkness come charging towards them. Countless tentacles struck from behind. Like a giant dome, the tentacles covered their heads and blocked their way forward. Within the darkness, Thales sucked in a breath of cold air. Right after he pulled Little Rascal up, he heard the sound of flesh scraping against each other rise from all around him. In his line of vision, the tentacles shining with a red light came charging towards him from all angles, leaving no space forgotten. Little Rascal hugged him tightly as she cried out in fear. No, is there no chance? Thales desperately felt around his waist and touched JC's dagger. Right then, the tentacles surrounding Thales shuddered all at once. Blue glowing spots suddenly shot out from the red light that filled his entire vision. The approaching tentacles paused. Boom, bang, splat, asterisk. Strange explosions rang successively in his ear. Within the next second, a ray of moonlight appeared within the darkness. It grew bigger and brighter, until it chased away the shadows cast by the tentacles. Boom, pow, smash, bang, splat, asterisk. Thales watched in shock as hundreds of the blood tentacles around him imploded one after another. When they burst, a vast layer of blood fog and broken limbs flew out of them like shrapnel. Another moment passed as hundreds of the smaller tentacles exploded directly at their roots. The giant tentacle beneath the blood mystic also wobbled internally. A big hole ruptured on its surface and blood seeped through it as innumerable droplets. Such fast reactions, wizard's apprentice. Giza laughed out loud and lightly caressed the tentacle beneath her. Then, the scattered tentacles, due to the explosion, struggled swiftly on the ground and started transforming. Some of the larger broken limbs had countless appendages and calves grow from it, making them resemble spiders and scorpions. The smaller broken limbs would stretch out to resemble tadpoles or snakes. Some of them even shrank into a ball and started rolling like the wheels from his previous world. Their similarity was that once they transformed, they would run, crawl, roll, or use other methods to charge at Thales and Little Rascal. As he watched the hundreds of oddly shaped, little creatures, and their convoluted figures chase after them, Thales felt his scalp tingle. He immediately turned around and ran with all his might. Seriously, man, I have trypophobia. Little Rascal seemed to have realized the severity of the situation. She clenched her jaw as she relentlessly caught up with Thales' pace. However, they simply could not outrun the creatures. Suddenly, a six-legged, one-eyed monster with a pair of claws leapt to their side. As Thales caught a glimpse of this thing out of the corner of his eyes, his body erupted immediately with goosebumps. In the next second, the monster suddenly trembled and exploded like the tentacles. The countless others behind it also exploded into blood droplets that rained down from the sky. Blood completely drenched Thales and Little Rascal's face. Before Thales could rejoice, he suddenly felt that the blood on his head started jerking around as if it had life. Like millions of little tadpoles, it started to move and tremble on his skin simultaneously. What the FCK? Disgust and fear simultaneously flashed through Thales' mind. Fortunately, an unprecedented gust of wind then came and swept Thales and Little Rascal into the air. Whoosh, asterisk. This wind seemed to have its own awareness. It entered from every spot imaginable and swept off Giza's blood from their skin. Thales and Little Rascal slipped onto the floor again, disheveled and exhausted. That strong gust of wind grew stronger still. With a rumble, it blew several houses apart as it curled towards Giza's direction. It broke her newborn tentacles, scattered them and caused them to explode in midair. Without hesitation, Thales got up as he pulled Little Rascal with him. With the momentum of the wind, they ran forward desperately. Run! He gasped for breath. The fluctuations had been activated for a long time in his body, and it was for this reason that Thales held Little Rascal's hand from time to time, in case she was unable to keep up. Run! He clenched his jaw, knowing that everything related to blood and living things behind him could become a weapon to bring about his death. Just run. This is a desperate dash for survival. Finally, the two of them ran out onto the street, and saw living people again. The Northlanders on the other street seemed to have heard the massive noise and vibrations. Many of them came out to see the commotion, and those who saw Thales sprinting engaged in fervent discussion. Thales wanted to yell for them to escape, but running with Little Rascal already left him winded. He had no strength to even open his mouth. He could only keep running subconsciously. Back at the street Thales fled from, a violent gust of wind billowed through and a figure stood in the air. The air mystic's eyes glowed blue. The blue light flowed onto his entire face, making it seem as if his face was cracking. He was silently confronting the blood mystic on the tentacle. But at that moment, the density, brightness and frequency of the blue light's current on Asda's face was stronger than when he fought against Black Sword. Ha 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 ha, the blood mystic seemed to be ecstatic. She laughed as she said to Asda, "See, evolving wasn't that hard, was it? You were right, evolving has increased the precision of my control." The air mystic's words were emotionless, neither was there any intonation in them, like he did not want to respond to Giza. Air is indeed omnipresent in, let's say, all life forms. As his voice fell, the giant tentacle beneath Giza exploded yet again into numerous holes from the inside out. It shriveled as it shrank. "You don't have much more blood to spare," the air mystic said coldly. "Give up, how about that?" The blood mystic smiled as she landed on the ground. No blood. Giza's words became more casual, her accented laughter turned strange. No blood. When she said that, her eyes lit up and the blood vessels on her face became more prominent than before. They began to tremble with increasing frequency as they branched into millions of tinier branches. Continue evolving. As Asda flickered in the blue light, the blue rays in his eyes grew brighter, yet his tone remained surprisingly flat. You've indeed turned insane. In the next moment, Giza laughed impudently. The ground beneath her feet cracked suddenly as constant tremors were heard. Crack. The cracks in the ground stretched nearly 100 meters wide, and the terrain began to bulge upwards. Crash. Asterisk. Amid the loud crashing, a giant monster tens of meters tall burst out of the ground with Giza as the center point. Debris and snow crumbled away from its body. The gigantic monster completely covered everything within the surrounding 100-meter radius. With the sound of Giza's chuckle, the monster divided into dozens of limbs comparable to the tentacles from earlier and slammed violently into the ground. It was just like a rooted old tree. It also resembled an incomparably enormous blood octopus. If Thales turned around, he would have recognized it as the terrifying Hydra in the birch tree forest. The only problem was that it was a dozen times larger than before. The Hydra's tentacles continued to penetrate deeper into the ground. Its limbs twitched violently, the tremors spreaded slowly without pause. Boom. Asterisk. Very quickly, in the streets and city districts hundreds of meters away, numerous terrifying giant tentacles erupted from the ground. One of them appeared on the street Thales had just run into. Thales stared blankly as the giant tentacle seemingly sprouted from the ground. The surrounding citizens burst out in cries of surprise and scattered in all directions. But their luck was clearly horrendous. In the next second, the tentacle immediately split into countless smaller tentacles. Like a predator, mercilessly and swiftly attacking all living beings around it. He felt his skin crawl, but Thales did not turn back. He pulled Little Rascal with him and continued his desperate sprint. Internally, he was howling in grief with all his might. What now? The previous blood mystic was not like this at all. Among the loud noise, the wails, pained screams, pleas for help, and desperate cries to life from countless citizens came traveling into his ears in succession like enchanted sounds. No, what is this? Help. Chop it off, chop, URK. Mommy. Run, hurry up. Damn it, you damned let me go. In several streets, numerous people were wrapped up by these small-sized tentacles and sent back to the huge tentacle serving as the root. They were made to fuse into that horrifying flesh and blood mess. It did not even let go of domesticated animals like cats and dogs, and even birds, insects, trees and flowers. No matter what it was, just like their lives, their voices came to an abrupt halt when they entered the tentacles' flesh. No, no. Thales gritted his teeth relentlessly as his tears fell continuously. The tragic scenes, far beyond what his mental state could endure, attacked his heart. Little Rascal just held her head low. She did not look to the sides, the rear or anywhere around her, and just kept crying and running. Several tentacles reached for them but Thales was already at the brink of exhaustion. He could not even think about dodging. There were only wisps of the shadowy airflow in the air wall that unwaveringly kept these terrifying predators at bay. Asda floated gently in midair. Everything in the air told him what was happening in the huge city district. No blood. On this end, the blood mystic grinned at the expressionless air mystic. I actually have an entire city's worth of flesh. How can there be no blood? With the new life energy provided, the Hydra's body became stronger and wider. The tentacle closest to Thales suddenly trembled and exploded into even more tentacles. They charged towards him. The air mystic turned his radiant eyes and glanced in the direction of Thales' fleeing form, far away and almost gone. He immediately turned back around. The blue lights on his body slowly changed from a streaked form into starry shapes. It was like a dazzling constellation. The words Asda said also grew calmer and more apathetic. Life must depend on air. The air mystic slowly raised a hand. If there is no air, how will life survive? Giza's smile slowly sank. Asda balled his hands into fists. During that instant, while in the distance, Thales felt another circle appear around him. In his field of vision, it seemed like it was just him and Little Rascal being contained in a transparent sphere made out of blue light. Then, Thales was surprised to see that everything around him was different. First of all, the sound in his surroundings had dissipated. Then, the snow on the ground began to boil at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. No, not just the snow. Everything before his eyes gradually evaporated into steam, as they boiled. A man next to them suddenly clutched at his neck, as if he had difficulty breathing. He opened his mouth in desperation as he tried to inhale. Steam emerged and dispersed rapidly from his eyes and mouth. A good 10 seconds later, the man collapsed, then his body began to swell. Thales and Little Rascal watched everything, stupefied. At the same time, they realized that the snow and items near them were still normal. What's going on? Little Rascal asked fearfully. Thales shook his head, flabbergasted. Even with his knowledge, he simply could not understand the current situation. He raised his head and saw numerous citizens around him began to bloat up one after another. Even those terrifying tentacles emitted steam in the struggle before they, too, collapsed onto the ground. Thales only felt horrified as he subconsciously grabbed Little Rascal and continued running onwards. In his eyes, the blue sphere was like a layer of protective film, protecting him and Little Rascal, not affected by the terrible situation happening in the outside world. In the silent, treacherous world, Thales ran past several people who fell to the ground. Some of their figures swelled like the man's, but more people were apparently dead as their bodies receded to their normal size in death. Their skin tightly stretched over their skeletons, like an old corpse. In that instant, Thales felt an unprecedented chill in his heart. His intuition told him that there was no one alive in this city anymore. He squeezed Little Rascal's hand tightly with his own trembling one. The girl was also dazed, just subconsciously following Thales. They ran past multiple corpses in all forms, shapes, and postures, but whom all have died with pain on their faces. Thales clenched his teeth tightly and wiped his tears away. He desperately suppressed a second wave of tears from his eyes. He knew that the deaths of these men and women were all because of him. He brought death and disaster. Thales shook his head fiercely as he tried to expel everything from his heart. He tried to not think about anything. Panic-stricken, terrified, and alarmed, he only had one objective left in mind. Run, run quickly, the further the better. In the silent world, the air mystic calmly floated in the air. He glanced at the blood mystic and her pet aloofly as they fell to the ground trembling and boiling. The blood in Giza's body was constantly evaporating, but the blood mystic still barely looked at him and even smiled. In the next second, the blood vessels on Giza's body grew profusely again. It was as if all the flesh had enveloped her. The huge tentacle beneath her suddenly moved. Large amounts of flesh shrank inwards, and from a gigantic hydra of several hundred meters, it shrank rapidly into a black and tiny but bizarre creature. It extended an even tinier looking but much sturdier tentacle, though it resembled a black bone spur. The air mystic remained expressionless, but his eyebrow twitched slightly. He clenched his right hand as tightly as possible and the blue light that flashed on his face grew rapidly. That thing suddenly shot 3 thin bone spurs from its body and sent them straight through Asda. The blue rays on Asda's body flashed and flickered. The air mystic's right hand unclenched. Then, as if a powerful force had struck, the entire shield district exploded baselessly in a loud bang. Boom, asterisk. Everything suddenly exploded and shattered, as if someone had suddenly struck them with their palms. Gravel flew everywhere and fragments were scattered in all directions. Quite a large number of them flew at Thales and Little Rascal, but were forcibly blocked by the blue light sphere. That was when Thales felt as if all of Dragon Cloud City was being rocked in a circular motion by a giant before it suddenly exploded. Both he and Little Rascal were knocked to the ground, but after that, Thales noticed that everything in front of him had reverted to normalcy. At the instant of the explosion, sound seemed to have returned suddenly. Snow and water stopped evaporating. The withered, mummified corpses of the people started returning to normal. Thales gasped in shock. He turned his head and looked in Asda and Giza's direction, but could see nothing. Little Rascal trembled as she tugged at his sleeve. Thales turned his head around and saw Little Rascal staring blankly ahead. There were corpses strewn all over the street spanning several tens of meters, over 100 of them. Thales knew in his heart that there were probably more corpses lying around on the other streets. He tried desperately to control the trembling in his chest and forced down the lump in his throat. Little Rascal was sobbing quietly. Why? Little Rascal shivered and shook her head in grief. Her tears fell steadily. What exactly are these? Don't look. Thales took a deep breath, clenched his jaw and resisted his own urge to cry. He resolutely covered Little Rascal's eyes and held her as they continued forward. Don't look. In that moment, an immense feeling of sorrow welled up in Thales' heart. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Soon. It will pass soon, it will pass." Far away, the air mystic recovered slowly under the blue light's restoration. He stared blankly at Giza. Surprised, Giza giggled as she returned a look, "But this is life, isn't it? Did you know, even in a vacuum void of air, there is a life form that will live on tenaciously?" Asda stared at her, the blue light on his face sparkled. "That boy, he must have been born under a lucky star. Are you prepared to begin the second round?" The blood mystic charmingly shook her head. The veins on her face turned into an even more terrifying shade of dark purple. "I'm coming. If you evolve again, you'll have to knock on the door." Without any emotion in his voice and as if he was pure logic, the air mystic stared at Giza calmly, as if she was not going after the potential mystic he wanted to protect. "Are you sure?" "Ah, little puppy Asda." The blood mystic licked the corner of her lips. With mischievous charm, she said, "I am sure. You might want to guard him closely now." Ellipsis. A distance away, on a small roof in Armor District was a young man in white. He stared at the terrifying scene in Shield District with a grave expression as well as the frightening creature of about dozens of feet tall. He was not the only one who came out to watch the commotion. On both sides of the street in Armor District, Citizens appeared outside large and small houses. They gesticulated at the monster in horror. But the young man seemed rather special. For some strange reason, he seemed to be talking to air. Yes, right, the young man in white said somewhat anxiously, it has begun. However, there are several small no, large mishaps. The young man took a deep breath, raised his right hand, and said to the air, that homicidal maniac seems to have gone more berserk than expected. Did Black Sword really have the ability to push that monster to this extent? The young man paused and nodded his head. Right, at this rate, I suspect that the whole of Dragon Cloud City will be torn down by it. In the distance, the monster shriveled suddenly. All right, I will keep watching. Well, it seems like the commotion has abated. The young man sighed in relief and continued, but I suggest that we should stay cautious and consider a few other possibilities. Maybe there will be some unexpected factors this evening. A few minutes later. Boom, asterisk. A violent explosion suddenly erupted from Shield District. The young man's eye widened. He stared intently at Shield District in the distance. Shield District, filled with single-story houses of various sizes, had just one layer sliced cleanly off. Oh God, you will not believe this. The young man said hurriedly, this is preposterous. That monster practically wants to destroy the world. An accident must have happened. Be it Ramon or Black Sword, I don't believe that they can push the monster to such an extent. You're sure there's no problem with that? The young man froze, his expression was unpleasant. Yes, he exhaled, we shall do it that way then. The young man put down his right hand and stopped talking. His expression was graver than before. Ellipsis. Your Majesty, have you seen it? Nicholas hastily rushed to the dais to report back to King Nuven. The old king stared intently at Dragon Cloud City beneath the dais, his gaze locked at the furthest, lowest, largest, and most populated city district. Ah, King Nuven clenched his teeth and his eyes were bloodshot. I saw it. Just then, a blood-red, giant monster suddenly appeared, followed by the sounds of endless vibrations and blood-curdling screams that could be heard clearly even from Heroic Spirit Palace. Then, the monster went silent once again. Several minutes later, another loud bang sounded. The entirety of Shield District visibly became one layer lower. How unexpected. King Nuven's words contained a heavy vehemence. Besides Raikuru, I presume that I am the first Northland king who is fortunate enough to witness it after more than 600 years. King Nuven clenched his fists tightly, his eyes surged with the flames of anger and hatred. Since childhood, a monster that could only be seen in illustrations, the Hydra, Kilika. Raikuru's archenemy. King Nuven slammed his palm on the platform, his palm burst with blue veins. Nicholas gritted his teeth and glanced at his blade. He grasped the hilt tightly. What exactly happened to Shield District? King Nuven restrained his own tone, and only by every last ounce of his strength did he manage to say calmly, how many citizens were evacuated. What about the patrol's report? Red Witch Kalshan solemnly walked up from behind him. She looked at the city district in the distance, saturated with smoke and dust. Slowly, she let out a sigh. When she looked up again, the Red Witch's eyes became clear and indifferent once more. Your Majesty, Red Witch said flatly, forgive me as I speak forthrightly. I'm afraid that. Kalshan made a slight, respectful bow. There's no longer a Shield District.